If you only had a short time left to live, would you keep pushing yourself to be the perfect child to please your family, or would you choose to rebel and run away to live for yourself, even just for one day? This is a heartbreaking yet deeply heartwarming story about a medical student who decides to escape her suffocating world after discovering she has a terminal illness. However, behind the suffocation she endures lies a lifetime of silent sacrifices. To understand why this young girl is under so much pressure, we must look into her mother's life. Mrs. Lee is a single mother raising her daughter alone. To make a living, she works as a construction supervisor, a job typically held by men. Every day, she works surrounded by an all-male crew. She not only coordinates the work, but also has to win over the newly arrived director. At his welcome party, Mrs. Lee drinks heavily, sings, and endures crude jokes from her male colleagues just to keep the atmosphere lively. By the end of the night, despite being completely drunk, she still forces a cuffbang, smile, and respectfully sees the director off. Fortunately, her best friend Sun Young, who cooks at the construction site, is always there to support her. At that moment, her daughter Hee-ji arrives to pick her up. Excitedly, Mrs. Lee pulls Hee-ji over to proudly show her off to everyone. She announces that her daughter is a top medical student and the greatest pride of her life. The director looks Hee-ji up and down with amusement, making inappropriate remarks. Feeling extremely uncomfortable, Hee-ji quickly helps her mother leave. On the way home, listening to her mother complain about the director and whine about everything at the site, she feels incredibly depressed. After getting out of the car, she asks her mother why she has to live like this and admits she is terrified of becoming like her in the future. However, Mrs. Lee brushes it off, thinking her daughter is just being moody. Once sober, Mrs. Lee calls a co-worker to demand her money back. This is the tuition money she prepared for Hee-ji. The co-worker shamelessly refuses, claiming he is sick and has no money to pay. Realizing she is late, Mrs. Lee rushes to get ready for work and sees her daughter just relaxing. She scolds the girl for poor time management. Annoyed, Hee-ji declares she is leaving this house and slams the door. At the construction site, Mrs. Lee faces trouble again from the director. She has just been reassigned to survey the site. The unresolved issues left by her predecessor are entirely blamed on her, and the director demands immediate solutions. Mrs. Lee is furious and thinks the man is out of his mind, but since he is her boss, she has no choice but to obey. Meanwhile, Hee-ji is going through her internship at the hospital. Her professor constantly scolds the interns. He turns to mock Hee-ji for fainting in the operating room. He sarcastically remarks that someone so fearful has no right to be a doctor. Hee-ji cannot take it anymore. She claps loudly and calls out the two doctors for merely bullying interns. She states that if they spent that time on medical research, they might have won a Nobel Prize by now. Hearing this, the professor forces a laugh but is deeply embarrassed. After speaking her mind, she packs her things, takes off her uniform, and throws it straight into the trash. She personally ends the career path she was supposed to follow. Back at the site, Mrs. Lee receives an unexpected call from the director ordering her to come in for an investigation. Knowing her friend is in trouble, Sun Young comes over to hug and encourage her. On the way there, Mrs. Lee cannot believe her ears and immediately calls her daughter, hoping the school made a mistake. Meanwhile, Hee-ji has already hit the road for a trip with her best friend. When her mother calls to question her, she calmly replies that she has lived according to her mother's wishes for years, but she no longer wants to and is running away. She tells her mother not to call back and instantly blocks the number. Soon after, the two girls hang out by the beach, eating, laughing, and enjoying their freedom. Mrs. Lee returns home and angrily complains to Sun Young. She vents about being a single mother since she was 20, working tirelessly to raise Hee-ji and giving up her own life to provide for her child. Yet, Hee-ji fails to understand her good intentions and lives recklessly and selfishly. Later that night, Hee-ji thinks about her illness and her mother. She tosses and turns, unable to sleep. Back home, Mrs. Lee assumes her daughter is just stressed and tries to transfer some money for her to relax, but the transaction is denied. Checking at the bank, she discovers her daughter's account has been locked. The next day, Hee-ji and her friend continue their journey to a coastal village. Hee-ji has always wanted to visit. She has a strong feeling that coming here might open up a new chapter in her life. Not long into the drive, their car suddenly starts smoking. The two quickly jump out. Hee-ji wants to call the insurance company, but her friend stops her. She secretly borrowed this car from her dad, and if her mom finds out, she will be in deep trouble. While they are figuring out what to do, two older women and a man walk over from the fields. These three are incredibly welcoming. To show the helpful spirit of Chung-hae village, they call someone to fix the car. Learning the girls haven't eaten, the older woman, who is also the village head, prepares a hearty meal for them. Hee-ji's friend excitedly posts a photo on social media, not knowing Sun Young has seen it. The two worried mothers instantly track the location through the picture. furniture and head out. After the meal, the village head calls the mechanic. When he arrives, Heeji's friend is completely captivated by the middle-aged man's charm. The village head introduces him as Mr. Yu, the director of a nearby architectural firm. Family members always share resemblances, and soon his son Bohun steps out. He explains that replacing a few parts will get the car running again. However, he suggests contacting the insurance company. Suspecting the car is stolen, Mr. Yu advises them to turn themselves in and warns the villagers not to let unidentified strangers in. Finding it annoying, Heeji says they do not want to bother anyone and just want to park at a public lot. The locals reply that parking is allowed anywhere here. However, wild dogs and boars roam those areas at night. Terrified, Heeji quickly changes her attitude and begs Mr. Yu for help. A local woman also steps in, vouching that the girls are great workers. If Mr. Yu lets them stay, they can help out on his farm. She then pulls the two girls along to plead with him. Mr. Yu softens and agrees to bring the car into his yard. He promises to buy parts in the city tomorrow for repairs. Right after the girls settle in, Mrs. Lee and Sun Young arrive. Seeing Heeji, her mother immediately demands to know why she ruined such a bright future. She reminds her how hard it was to get into medical school. Heeji admits she never liked medicine from the start, and every day at school was pure torture. After the friends step away, Heeji finally tells her mother the truth. She reveals she has a brain tumor. At first, Mrs. Lee refuses to believe it and scolds her for talking nonsense. But Heeji's serious expression makes her panic. She rushes her daughter to the hospital for a checkup. The results confirm Heeji's words. Her brain condition is not looking good. Leaving the hospital, Mrs. Lee tries to put on a brave face. She comforts her daughter, saying modern medicine is very advanced and any disease can be cured. She urges her to stay strong and keep living. But Heeji already knows her condition and just wants to be left alone. Mrs. Lee does not stop her because she also needs a place to vent. Back home, Mrs. Lee is incredibly restless. To find an outlet for her emotions, she wakes up in the middle of the night to clean the house. While cleaning, she calls Sun Young and angrily blames her with unreasonable words. Sun Young is utterly confused about what is wrong with her friend. She immediately goes to Mrs. Lee's house to check if she is sick. Helpless, Mrs. Lee finally reveals the truth about Heeji's brain tumor. Sun Young cannot accept that cruel fate keeps striking her friend's life. She hugs Mrs. Lee and cries bitterly, constantly asking the heavens why it had to be Heeji. Hearing her friend cry, even a strong mother like Mrs. Lee cannot hold back her tears. At the same time on the beach, Heeji silently cries over her tragic fate. Just then, someone walks up and pats her shoulder to comfort her. In truth, Heeji had always been a good girl. She listened to her mother and studied hard to get into medical school. During her studies, she constantly pushed herself, but coughing up blood signaled her illness. Back then, her mother kept pressuring her about scholarships, adding immense weight to her shoulders. Even during lunch breaks, she would eat and study simultaneously. Seeing this, her peers mocked her for being greedy and not knowing her limits. Finally, during a surgery observation, she suddenly fainted and was rushed to the emergency room. Waking up, the doctor delivered the brain tumor diagnosis. She thought hard work would bring opportunities, but fate played a cruel joke. Seeing other brain tumor patients being cared for by their parents, Heeji felt both pitiful and jealous. That night, she intended to tell her mother the truth, but when her mother came home from work and saw no dinner ready, she grumbled. She said she only wished for Heeji to quickly become a great doctor so she could retire and shop all day. Looking at her mother's muddy shoes, the cries for help choked in her throat. She swallowed her grievances and went back to her room to cry alone. She felt guilty for burdening her mother while also blaming her for not noticing her struggles. Thinking of all this, she felt a mix of sorrow, guilt, pain, and anger, and burst into tears. Ultimately, she decided to leave home and find her own life to escape the suffocating pressure. Returning to the present, Mrs. Lee visits the hospital to discuss treatment options for Heeji. The doctor advises operating as soon as possible, but the cost is substantial. With her current suspension, Mrs. Lee cannot afford to lose her job to pay for the surgery. Therefore, she humbles herself and invites her department head out for drinks, hoping to be reinstated soon. The department head, however, still insists that the issues left by the former colleague are her responsibility. He firmly wants to fire her. Unable to keep her cool any longer, Mrs. Lee yells right in his face, calling him a thoughtless drunkard. She points out that everyone only tolerates working under him because they have families to feed. Finally, she demands that he process her termination properly. If he intentionally makes things difficult, she will drag him to court at all costs. Leaving the place, she calls Sun Young to recount everything. She says she has worked hard her whole life to protect her daughter, but was absent exactly when her daughter needed her most. This time, she is determined to stay by her side. Her best friend reassures her that she did great and even offers to lend money for the treatment. Hearing Hearing this, Mrs. Lee is deeply moved. Meanwhile, Hee-ji stands watching Bo-hyun fix the car. He feels awkward being stared at. Bo-hyun suggests she go sightseeing around the village. As soon as she leaves, he admitted that he had bought the wrong parts, so he couldn't fix the vehicle, and asked his dad to go to the city to buy new ones. Mr. Yu immediately understands his son is trying to get the girl's attention. He bought the wrong parts and couldn't fix it, so he told her to go somewhere else. Wandering around the village, Hee-ji is suddenly startled by a dark shadow lurking in the field. Remembering the villagers talking about fighting wild boars and dogs, she reaches for her phone to call for help. Unexpectedly, the shadow stands up to greet her and then collapses unconscious. It turns out to be Tae-oh. Working too long in the field gave him heat stroke. Drawing on her medical background, Hee-ji quickly performs first aid. She carefully instructs him to drink plenty of water and rest. Curious villagers gather around. Hee-ji bluntly states she was a medical student but has dropped out and is currently doing nothing. With that, she bids them farewell and walks away. On the other side, Mrs. Lee decides to buy some fruits and vegetables and heads to the countryside to find her daughter, hoping to convince her to return to Seoul for treatment. Having purchased the car parts, Mr. Yu catches a bus back. Coincidentally, Mrs. Lee is on the very same bus. During the ride, a bump causes her fruit bag to spill everywhere. Mr. Yu kindly helps her pick them up. Seeing this, the driver suddenly brakes to assist, causing Mr. Yu to lose his balance and fall to the floor. Due to the momentum, Mrs. Lee falls right into his arms. Both awkwardly stand up and apologize, but as their eyes meet, they realize the other is a very special person from their past. Years ago, as a student, Mrs. Lee was chatting with friends on a bus when it suddenly braked. She almost fell, but a male student reached out to catch her. That person was Mr. Yu. She fell in love at first sight. Being bold and straightforward, she brought her girl gang right to his classroom that day, dancing and holding up a banner to confess her feelings. Even an introvert like Mr. Yu was won over by her lively and brave spirit. Now, reuniting with her first love, Mrs. Lee excitedly brings up old memories. She admits he was very handsome back then, but his fashion sense was completely unacceptable. Even though her friends teased her for having terrible taste, she only had eyes for him. Learning she is looking for her daughter, Mr. Yu guesses Hee-ji is her child and takes her to his house. Seeing her mom, Hee-ji turns and runs. Mrs. Lee chases after her, pleading with her to return to Seoul for treatment. But Hee-ji wants to be alone during this time, because once she becomes a patient, her life will completely change. She needs to find a reason to keep living. Seeing her daughter refusing to live for her sake breaks Mrs. Lee's heart. Hee-ji also apologizes, saying just worrying about herself is exhausting enough. She advises her mother to live for her own life. It suddenly starts raining. Standing in the rain, watching her daughter walk away like an abandoned child, Mrs. Lee bursts into tears. Bo-hyun stands nearby witnessing their argument, feeling both pity for the mother and worry for the daughter. Hee-ji walks into the ocean under the rain, blaming the heavens for mocking her with a life full of pain. Unable to vent her anger, she steps deeper into the water, screaming to release the unfairness in her heart. Quickly exhausted, she falls into the water and lets herself sink to the bottom. In the nick of time, Bo-hyun dives in, pulls her up, and brings her to shore. After showering and changing, Mrs. Lee is comforted by Mr. Yu. He says the two of them are going through a clash of menopause and puberty, so they both need to be patient. Just then, a soaking wet Hee-ji returns. Knowing she almost drowned, Mrs. Lee anxiously asks what happened. Terrified, she tried to end her life. Hee-ji claims the waves were too strong and she couldn't fight them. However, she states she still will not return to Seoul. She wants to overcome everything on her own. Just like falling into the sea, she will not stop going to the beach because of it. She refuses to keep enduring things just to stay safe anymore. Later, Mr. Yu offers to cook a meal for the mother and daughter. Tae-oh also joins the gathering. He curiously asks if Mr. Yu was handsome in his youth. Not wanting everyone to know her unusual past taste, Mrs. Lee simply praises his intelligence. At this point, Hee-ji compliments Mr. Yu's beautiful house. She always dreamed of a home like this, where opening the window reveals the beauty of the four seasons, offering a truly peaceful life. She turns and criticizes her mother, who promised to build her a house. Despite being a chief construction supervisor, she doesn't even own a home. She hopes her mother stops borrowing recklessly and just saves up for a small apartment. Mr. Yu then introduces a plot of land with good feng shui, advising Mrs. Lee to discuss it with her husband. Mrs. Lee bluntly states she is a single mother. Hearing this, Hee-ji's face drops. She pulls her mother away and scolds her for making it public. She studied incredibly hard, so classmates wouldn't dare gossip about her background. Misunderstood by her daughter, Mrs. Lee feels a sharp pain in her heart. Blaming herself for being tactless, she decides to return to Seoul the next day. She walks away and sits alone in a corner, She recalls Heeji's first day of kindergarten. She had dressed up beautifully to make a good impression, but as soon as she sat down, the parents next to her whispered, mocking her as a careless party girl. Furious, she fought back, proudly stating she was a single mother who had never been divorced, and even used her good looks to mock them back. She won the argument, but right after, she went into the bathroom and cried her eyes out. In reality, she attacked first, simply because she feared being judged. She never expected that would place a heavy burden on her daughter. The next day, Bohyun seeks out Heeji and proposes a deal. He will fix the car, and in return, she must help him work. The two work together in a flower greenhouse. Although they aren't perfectly synced at first, Bohyun guides her carefully, and Heeji learns fast and does an excellent job. Her focused demeanor leaves him staring in awe. This teamwork brings them closer. Bohyun shares that he dropped out in 11th grade and has worked in the greenhouse for 6 years. Heeji can tell he truly loves his job. He asks why she always argues with her mom, mentioning he saw them fighting yesterday. He advises her that anger doesn't solve anything. Disliking his intrusion into her private life, she walks away, but he quickly follows to apologize. Returning to the house, Heeji finds her mother's phone left behind and spots a text from a former coworker who owes her 30 million won. The man refuses to pay, but is throwing a lavish 80th birthday party for his mother. She urges her mom to use this chance to collect the debt. Mrs. Lee feels it wouldn't look good. Annoyed, Heeji says there is no point in saving face at a time like this. She drags her mother along to demand the money. Since they don't have a car, they get a ride there. Arriving at the worker's house, they find only 4 hungry, unattended children. The oldest girl says their dad took grandma to the hospital. Out of pity, the 3 of them help clean the house, dry the blankets, and cook for the kids. The eldest sister is very grateful and reveals the truth. Her dad didn't take grandma to the hospital. He is at a restaurant throwing a huge birthday party for her. Mrs. Lee assumes he is using her money for a massive feast, but upon arriving, they only see the coworker and a few gray-haired elders trying to make the mother happy. With just a single dish of food on the table, Mrs. Lee cannot bring herself to ask for the money. As they are about to leave, the coworker runs out, stops her, and apologizes for using the borrowed money to put his mother in a nursing home. Being in the same industry, he knows how hard it is to earn money and promises to pay it back. This brings back memories of Mrs. Lee's own tragic past. She was once kicked out by her father for getting pregnant before marriage. When she grew up and started working, she faced constant harassment at the construction site. Fortunately, whenever she hit rock bottom, someone always lent a helping hand. Her best friend never abandoned her, and a grandmother gave her money to raise her child. Even her young daughter comforted her when she was exhausted. She tells the worker not to give up, saying hard times will pass and he must stand strong for his children. She waives the debt completely. The coworker feels deeply guilty, but truly cannot pay. However, upon receiving a text about Heeji's illness, he gifts Mrs. Lee the deed to his old house and land. Even though the dilapidated house is not worth much, he offers it as a small contribution to Heeji's medical funds. He then tells Heeji she has an amazing mother and that he will keep living to repay this miracle. Later that night, Mrs. Lee remembers her daughter's complaints, realizing she needs a different lifestyle, adding the fact that she recently mentioned liking the houses in this area. Mrs. Lee looks at the old house deed and seeks out Mr. Yu to go check out the property together. Returning to the present, Mrs. Lee was busy designing the dream home when Heeji woke up. The mother offered to buy breakfast, but the girl refused. Nevertheless, Mrs. Lee went out anyway. Heeji then called Aunt Sun Young, asking her to take her mother back to Seoul. She worried her mother had quit her job to come here and did not want her wasting time. Sun Young explained that Mrs. Lee did not want to leave her alone because she felt completely empty without her daughter. However, Heeji remained firm that they needed to stay apart since their relationship had never been good. Hearing this, Sun Young had no choice but to agree. Meanwhile, while buying vegetables, Mrs. Lee curiously asked the shop owner about the house on the mountain. The owner shared that when it was built, the owner had invited feng shui experts and fortune tellers to hold a grand ceremony. Yet, after it was finished, no one ever moved in, leaving it looking like an abandoned house. Despite hearing this, Mrs. Lee's determination to renovate the place remained unshaken. Back home, Mrs. Lee prepared a hearty breakfast and invited Mr. Yu and his son to join them, suggesting both families share meals from now on. After eating, she acted adorably while begging the architect to help renovate the house. He firmly refused and even kicked her out, stating he could not and did not want to take on the project. Mrs. Lee kept trying to persuade him, expressing her strong desire to make this plan happen. Right then, some nosy neighbors walked by. Overhearing fragments of the conversation, they misunderstood and thought the two were having a late-night romantic chat. The neighborhood women eagerly encouraged Mr. Yu, saying that persistent pursuit would eventually yield good results. Mrs. Mrs. Lee stood there, utterly confused, while an embarrassed Mr. Yu pulled her into his car. The village head, still not giving up, advised them against being too intimate inside the vehicle. Eventually, unable to handle her persistence, Mr. Yu agreed to go see the old house. Inside, only an empty frame remained. He deemed the renovation far too difficult and advised her to give up early. However, Mrs. Lee stayed highly optimistic, confident that he would eventually agree. At the same time, Sun Young arrived to find Heji. Watching from a distance, Bo-hun grew curious about what the girl was planning next. Meanwhile, Mr. Yu started to hesitate and asked his assistant if he knew anything about the abandoned property. Thinking his boss was possessed by a ghost, the assistant advised him to find a shaman. Consequently, Mr. Yu put the thought aside. Back home, Mrs. Lee immediately guessed her daughter had called Sun Young over to convince her to return. Brushing it off, she dragged her friend to see the old house. Sun Young's reaction was exactly like the architect's. She believed making it livable would require as much effort as building a new one from scratch. Yet Mrs. Lee excitedly described her vision for the room layouts. She even pointed to an empty space, planning to open a restaurant there and hoping Sun Young would bring her culinary skills to join the business. Unwilling to crush her friend's enthusiasm, Sun Young also decided to stay and wait for the house to be completed. Over by the beach, Heji was taking a walk, recalling how Bo-hun had complained about her smelling bad during her argument with her mother the day before. She muttered to herself, calling him a boring guy who liked to show off and lecture others. Speak of the devil, he suddenly appeared. Bo-hun invited her to work in the garden with him. Afterward, he handed her an envelope of wages, stamped with the words that she was awesome. She tried to give it back, but he held her hand tightly, refusing to take no for an answer. He insisted that anyone who helped out in the village got paid. As they stood in an awkward silence, Teo walked up and invited them to go surfing. Remembering how she had almost drowned last time, Bo-hyun opposed the idea. Furthermore, he had already heard about her illness. However, craving a new experience, Heji firmly insisted on joining. Mrs. Lee discussed the house project with her best friend. Sun Young was thrilled and wanted to live together too. She offered to find an architect, but her friend proudly announced she already had one. Just then, Mr. Yu showed up. Mrs. Lee immediately ran over to continue her persuasion. This time, he finally agreed. Naturally, the gossiping neighbors walked by again, catching bits of a conversation about a man and a woman being alone. Their minds went straight to something scandalous. Seeing Mrs. Lee jumping for joy, they all gave a thumbs up in approval. Down at the beach, Heji met up with Bo-hun's friends. After warming up, they started surfing. Teo tried teaching her, but she failed over and over. Seeing her lack of talent, he suggested switching to a float for safety. Refusing to give up, she took a short break and then grabbed her board to head back into the water. This time, she managed to stand up, fully enjoying the thrill of victory. Seeing her determination, Bo-hun smiled. He was genuinely happy to see her free from the sorrow that had consumed her days before. Back at the house, Sun Young cooked dinner and suggested inviting Mr. Yu over to talk things out properly. She noticed he seemed uncomfortable and felt she could read his mind. Mrs. Lee denied it, telling her friend not to judge a book by its cover, insisting he was a good man. Soon after, Sun Young realized the two had known each other since their school days and noticed how happy her friend looked around him. Meanwhile, Heji and the others returned. Seeing her soaking wet, Mrs. Lee anxiously asked where she had been. Bo-hyun explained they went surfing. Relieved, Mrs. Lee invited him to stay for dinner. Teo quickly chimed in, asking to tag along. Though slightly reluctant, she agreed. That evening, they brought the meal over to Mr. Yu's place. During dinner, Mrs. Lee gently wiped an eyelash off his face. The suddenly romantic atmosphere quickly turned awkward. Realizing everyone was staring at them, an embarrassed Mr. Yu claimed nothing was going on. Teo teased him, saying that, since he was divorced, this kind of thing was completely normal. After the meal, the architect told Mrs. Lee that he knew about Heji's illness through his son, and wanted the mother and daughter to have a nice place to live. Mrs. Lee misunderstood, thinking he only agreed to help out of pity, but he quickly clarified that his current projects were delayed, leaving him with free time. Regardless, she was grateful and happily accepted his proposal. He suggested they visit her old house in Seoul sometime to gather design inspiration for the new home. Later that night, Heji asked how long her mother's leave from work was. She bluntly revealed she had quit her job and was not returning to Seoul, choosing to stay here with her. Furious, the daughter assumed her mother was staying out of fear that she might die suddenly. She stated she was already exhausted and had no energy left to worry about her mother's life. Begging her not to be a burden, Mrs. Lee was heartbroken. She asked if her daughter would abandon her if she were the one who was sick. Unexpectedly, the girl bluntly replied that if that was what she wanted, she would do it. The argument escalated. Stepping in, Sun Young revealed that Mrs. Lee was wrongfully fired from her company agony over missing funds. Hee-ji immediately questioned if her mother fought for justice or just suffered in silence like a fool. Right at that moment, a severe headache struck her. Panicking, Mrs. Lee begged to let her live together, saying families should not be apart, but Hee-ji still refused. To her, living together and fighting every day was worse than staying apart and meeting only when needed. These harsh words left her mother completely devastated. The next morning, as the two older women were heading out, they told Hee-ji to make her own breakfast, only to find her shivering and curled up in pain. They rushed her to the hospital. The doctor diagnosed it as a simple fever caused by a sore throat, assuring them there was nothing to worry about. Mrs. Lee stayed by her side all night. When she woke up, the girl still acted coldly. Trying to make peace, Mrs. Lee opened up about her own past. Her father died when she was in middle school. Mother then dated 3 different men. After being deceived by the first 2, her mother abandoned her to follow the 3rd man to Vietnam. Mrs. Lee cried endlessly back then, feeling completely alone and constantly blaming herself. She felt she should have begged her mother to stay or take her along. Hearing this, Hee-ji was stunned, as her mother had always described her grandmother as the most beautiful woman who cooked the best food. Mrs. Lee explained she only wanted her daughter to have fond memories of her grandmother. Breaking down, Hee-ji confessed she hated how her mother always pretended to be strong, which forced her to also put up a brave front, and it was simply too exhausting. Tears streamed down Mrs. Lee's face as she admitted she genuinely did not know how to be a good mother. Hee-ji was not her biological daughter. With her own mother gone so early, she had no one to learn from. When her mother left, she failed to stop her, a regret she carried for years. This time, she just wanted her daughter by her side. Slowly understanding her mother's pain, Hee-ji apologized for her terrible behavior and finally admitted how terrified she was upon learning of her illness. Mrs. Lee pulled her into a tight embrace. The two cried their hearts out together. In that moment, their hearts finally connected, leaving no distance between them. After reconciling, Hee-ji shared the heartfelt moment with her aunt. Sun-young was overjoyed for them, but in her excitement, she accidentally let slip that Mrs. Lee was planning to rebuild the old house for her. Used to her mother's impulsive surprises, Hee-ji immediately demanded to see the property. On their way, they bumped into Tae-oh and Bo-hyun, who insisted on tagging along. Seeing the dilapidated house, Hee-ji was utterly shocked. Tae-oh joked that the place was perfect for shooting a horror movie or prehistoric exploration. After a quick look around, everyone advised Mrs. Lee that rebuilding was completely unnecessary. Back home, Hee-ji demanded her mother drop the renovation idea. However, Mrs. Lee explained that the local authorities had already approved the paperwork, and once Mr. Yu provided the design, construction could begin immediately. The mother and daughter got into another heated argument, throwing words back and forth until it escalated into a full-blown fight. Just then, Bo-hyun arrived to see Hee-ji. Witnessing the chaos, he quickly turned to leave. Mrs. Lee called him back. Throwing an arm around her daughter's shoulder, she awkwardly explained they were just having a normal discussion and told him not to be scared. The next day, Hee-ji returned to the greenhouse to help out. Among the workers was a girl who secretly had a crush on Bo-hyun. Feeling threatened by the newcomer's presence, she sarcastically called Hee-ji a fragile greenhouse flower who could not survive without her mother. Unfazed, Hee-ji shot back that she was a highly resilient plant who never let anyone bully her. Seeing this, the girl bluntly declared her feelings for Bo-hyun. Catching the warning tone, Hee-ji replied that her tastes were poor, not the same as hers. Dissatisfied with the answer, the girl argued that he was a rare, outstanding guy. Hee-ji casually responded that because of that, she was actually considering him a bit. Overhearing their conversation, Bo-hyun stepped in. To make his feelings clear, he invited Hee-ji to accompany him to the post office. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee and Mr. Yu were busy surveying the land. Right then, he received a notice to visit Seoul the next day to check building materials. Mrs. Lee offered to tag along so she could invite her old construction crew to check out the project. Taking a liking to the architect's assistant, Sun-young enthusiastically invited them out for drinks to discuss business matters. After finishing up at work, Bo-hyun took his companion to the post office to pick up a package. It turned out he was planning to study abroad. On their way back, they lingered in a peach orchard. Admiring the scenery, she praised the beauty of every corner of the village. Spotting a stone bridge ahead, Bo-hyun caught her drift and led her over. He reached out to help her step safely across the stepping stones. Seeing her struggle, he jumped over to steady her. Unexpectedly, they ended up sharing the same small rock. The tight space caused him to lose his balance and fall into the shallow river. She quickly apologized for her misstep. He laughed, apologized back, and then playfully pulled her into the water. He told her that instead of constantly worrying about getting her shoes wet, it was better to just get completely soaked. That way, she could move forward bravely without fear. Understanding his deeper meaning, she chose to embrace the moment, laughing and splashing water at him. The two splashed each other, playfully leaving all their life's worries behind. That night at home, recalling how she held his hand and played in the water, her heart fluttered. Seeing her spaced out, her mother asked what was on her mind, then announced her trip to Seoul tomorrow to meet the construction crew. Just then, Hee-ji received a text from her best friend. So, okay, asking where she was traveling. The next day, she decided to join her mother and aunt on the trip to go see her friend. Mr. Yu and Mrs. Lee shared a car ride, but she fell asleep before they were even halfway there. Gently, he placed his handkerchief over her face to block out the sunlight. Meanwhile, Hee-ji traveled with her aunt. She was incredibly anxious about how to break the news of her illness to Pox. So okay, Sun Young held her hand to comfort her, assuring her that since they were so close, her friend would definitely understand. Arriving at the campus, So Okay was overjoyed to see her, loudly calling out her name. In the meantime, Mrs. Lee brought the architect to the construction site to meet her old crew, but no one was around. As they were chatting, the crew leader finally called. Elsewhere, the two young friends bought some food and took a walk. At the same time, Mrs. Lee treated the crew leader to a meal and asked for his help with the house renovation. To her surprise, he eagerly agreed. Soon after, her other former colleagues also arrived to join the fun. Mr. Yu was left on the sidelines, but watching her chat so warmly with the men like brothers, he recalled the free-spirited girl from their high school days. After all these years, she had not changed a bit. Over on campus, the young girl reminisced about old times with her friend, but soon her smile faded as she struggled to find the right words. Noticing the heavy silence, So Okay asked what was wrong. Finally, she confessed everything about her terminal illness. It took So Okay a long time to process the shocking news before forcing herself to accept it. Trying to stay calm, she pulled her friend into a hug and told her to live her life exactly as she pleased from now on, without any hesitation or second-guessing. Afterward, they shared a tearful goodbye. Later, Hee-ji went to the restaurant to find her mother drinking with the old crew. As for So Okay, after seeing her friend off, she sat in a daze for a long time before calling her father. She burst into tears, blaming herself for not knowing about the illness and for carelessly sending joking texts. She kept asking her dad what she should do. Meanwhile, while Mrs. Lee was out buying hangover medicine, her former colleagues shared stories about her past struggles. When she first arrived at the construction site, no one respected a female supervisor, and they constantly opposed her. She was even once physically assaulted by an investor. However, everything changed one day when they overheard her on the phone with a sick Hee-ji. Buried in work at the site, she could only tell the young girl, who was alone in the hospital, to take care of herself. Hanging up the phone, Mrs. Lee burst into tears. In that moment, the crew realized how difficult her life truly was. From then on, they gradually accepted her, eventually won over by her strong character, and became her loyal friends. Hearing this, the daughter's heart grew heavy with intense guilt. On the ride back, she remained dead silent, but a drunk Mrs. Lee started acting playful. Unable to sit still, she leaned forward and excitedly declared that Mr. Yu would be the first man to step into her new house. Once home, Hee-ji went to make hangover soup, asking him to keep an eye on her mother. Mrs. Lee was completely out of it and refused to stay put. She grabbed his face, complimenting him for not changing at all and remaining as handsome as ever, which was why she liked him so much. Deeply flustered, he quickly handed her a glass of water to sober her up. Staring at a photo of her daughter, she admitted she did not know whether to face reality or run from it. She knew she was not okay at all, but had to pretend everything was fine. Mr. Yu completely understood that feeling. Years ago, when his wife left, a young Bohin cried and refused to let her go. He had to pull the boy away, telling him not to make a scene since his mother had a flight to catch. He was not okay back then either, but he faked a brave face to see his wife off. As Hee-ji put her mother to bed, the architect took the chance to photograph the house layout. He asked the girl why she was so against the renovation. She thought for a moment and explained that her mother had never lived for herself, always putting her first. Seeing her make that exact same sacrifice again made her incredibly angry and heartbroken. Mr. Yu then revealed he had asked Mrs. Lee the same question, and her answer was simply to live happily alongside her daughter. After seeing him out, Hee-ji lay next to her mother, recalling the times she cried alone in the hospital, feeling abandoned and resenting her mother for choosing work over her. Only now did she understand that her mother was working tirelessly while agonizing over her well-being. Her mother's pain and hardships were far greater than her own. Looking at the blueprint, she finally decided to build this dream together. Waking up the next day, Mrs. Lee found a prepared breakfast waiting for her. Her daughter initiated the conversation, agreeing to build the house and even suggesting changes to the blueprint, no longer wanting her bedroom to be far from her mother's. On the drive back, the two started bickering again over installing floor-to-ceiling glass windows windows and turning the basement into a home theater. Caught in the middle, Mr. Yu felt extremely awkward. Soon after, the construction crew sprang into action. Mrs. Lee returned to her old profession, personally supervising the quality. Sun Young and Heji took charge of the kitchen, providing full logistical support. With everyone's united effort, the construction progressed rapidly. Bo Hun and his friends came over to help move in. Everything fell right into place, marking the official completion of the new home. Mr. Yu orchestrated a special lighting moment. Moved by the gesture, Mrs. Lee held his hand as they awaited the magical reveal. Watching the warm lights illuminate her dream home, tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. She embraced her daughter in pure satisfaction, having finally fulfilled her wish of giving her a perfect new home. That night, admiring her brand new room, she decided to sleep with her mother but could not find her. It turned out she was outside obsessing over a broken light bulb. Grabbing her mother's hand, she reminded her that she had been working all day without eating. Working hard was great, but taking care of oneself had to come first. To her, her mother was an incredibly precious treasure. From now on, she promised never to let her mother drift away, keeping her close by her side. She also asked for one favor in return, that her mother would start valuing herself more than anyone else in the world. Basking in this heartwarming chat, their moment was abruptly ruined when two wild dogs stormed into the yard, growling and baring their teeth. The yard lights suddenly went out. As the aggressive beasts lunged forward, the terrified women hugged each other and screamed. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and a woman slowly approached. She tossed a sausage into the distance to lure the dogs away, then turned to smile at Mrs. Lee. Decades ago, Mrs. Lee's mother had bought a specific suitcase, claiming she needed it just in case she ever became a famous actress and needed to pack her belongings. At the time, Mrs. Lee had used the cheerful mood to plan a hot spring trip to persuade her father. Snapping back to the present, seeing someone who looked exactly like her late mother carrying that very same suitcase left Mrs. Lee staring in absolute shock while her daughter stood there, completely bewildered. Afterward, the three of them went inside for tea to talk. Mrs. Lee refused to believe the woman sitting across from her was her mother. Meanwhile, Heji suddenly remembered meeting her before, when she was crying alone on the beach after a massive fight with her mother. This exact woman had appeared beside her to offer comfort. Though she had no idea who she was at the time, Mrs. Lee firmly stated that her mother had passed away 20 years ago. Sun Young also chimed in, suggesting it was a case of mistaken identity, but the older woman sharply told her that nobody would think she was mute if she just kept quiet, forcing Sun Young into silence. Meanwhile, upon hearing the news, the villagers rushed over to inform them. This woman was the resident of the mansion behind the village woods. They recalled that 2 years ago, she and her husband had hitched a ride on their tractor coming back from the beach. The old lady gently corrected them, noting her husband had already passed away. Sensing her mental state was unstable, the villagers helped escort her back home. That night, Mrs. Lee tossed and turned, unable to sleep. She recalled receiving a call from the police years ago, informing her that her mother had died in Vietnam, and they needed to contact the family for funeral arrangements. Back then, she coldly replied that she did not know the person, yet the moment she hung up, she collapsed to her knees and sobbed uncontrollably. Even now, that pain remained fully intact in her memory. Early the next morning, Sun Young prepared a feast for them to taste test for the upcoming restaurant opening. Both praised her exceptional cooking skills, but Mrs. Lee felt something was missing and went outside to grab some flowers for plating. As for the name, Heji suggested, "Nature is a masterpiece," which the older women fully supported. After the meal, the three enjoyed some ice cream together. Noticing the overgrown weeds in the front yard, Mrs. Lee suggested hiring Bo Hun to clear them. Sun Young doubted him, saying he looked too much like a fragile scholar to do heavy lifting. Jumping to his defense, Heji argued he was not fragile, but rather rational and highly efficient. Slyly, her mother asked for his blood type and favorite color. Without missing a beat, she answered both perfectly. Seeing this, Mrs. Lee handed her a tough mission. Since they were so close, she had to recruit him and negotiate a good price. Speak of the devil, Bo Hin walked up right at that moment and, overheard, he promised a discount but requested an assistant. Without hesitation, the two mothers shoved Heji toward him. Seeing how brightly she smiled whenever he was around, they ruthlessly teased the young couple. Bo Hin started teaching her how to pull weeds, but struggled himself after several attempts. Seeing him struggle, she suggested pulling together. Applying force simultaneously, they both tumbled backward. She landed right against his chest, their close proximity making both their hearts race. Quickly sensing the awkward tension, she jumped up, holding the clump of weeds high to brag about her strength. Watching her enthusiastic energy, he could not help but smile affectionately. Around the same time, Mr. Yu brought over the expense report. Catching Mrs. Lee and Sun Sun-young just returning from the market. They invited him to stay for a meal. Afterward, as they sorted through the receipts, the uninvited old woman showed up, scolding Mrs. Lee for being a poor host. Ignoring her, Mrs. Lee continued calculating. The old lady glanced at the bills and instantly pointed out a calculation error. Double-checking, the architect confirmed she was right, patting Mrs. Lee's arm. The old woman advised her to live more carefully, adding that even though her mother was gone, she still had to look after herself. Enraged, Mrs. Lee stormed out to sit by the door, recalling a time in high school when she called her mother for a parental signature. Her mother had called her annoying, told her to forge the signature herself, and lectured her to accept reality and live carefully for the future. Inside the house, while Sun-young and Hee-ji were cooking for the old lady, they failed to notice her turning on the gas stove, which sparked a fire that caught the curtains. Hearing the screams, Mr. Yu rushed in and put out the flames. Amid the chaos, the old woman approached Mrs. Lee, rolled up her sleeve to reveal a scar, and complained she was hurt. Unable to take it anymore, Mrs. Lee screamed that she was not her daughter. She had tolerated the madness because of the woman's illness, but her patience was gone. She demanded her family's phone number, threatening to call the police. Delirious, the old lady asked if she was angry because she had arrived late. Boiling with rage, Mrs. Lee yelled that her real mother had abandoned her child for her own happiness, followed another man, and died in an accident. The old woman's presence was a constant reminder of that trauma, making every day a living hell. She demanded the old lady stop spouting nonsense. Seeing the frail woman trembling, Hee-ji scolded her mother for speaking so harshly to a sick person. Still blinded by anger, Mrs. Lee snapped back that the girl understood absolutely nothing. Since no one knew the agony she had endured, Hee-ji had no right to tell her to tolerate it. Those harsh words unintentionally deeply wounded the girl, prompting her to walk away. Afterward, Mr. Yu escorted the old lady back home to rest. On his way back, he vividly remembered a scene from the past. Back then, a heavily intoxicated Mrs. Lee's mother had caused a massive scene, screaming that she was an actress and no one had the right to badmouth her. A young Mrs. Lee had rushed over, desperately trying to drag her home, but her mother just sat on the ground wailing. She cried that she was meant to shine, not to bow down to others. Surrounded by gossiping onlookers, and completely at a loss, Mrs. Lee was suddenly rescued when a young Mr. Yu appeared, helping her carry her mother home. To comfort her, he had given her an apple and gently patted her head. Meanwhile, the two young men were busy working. Noticing his friend's gloominess, Bohan asked what was wrong. Tae-oh admitted he had no mood to work today and wanted to go somewhere. But Bohyun rejected the idea, stating no work meant no pay. Right at that moment, a downcast Hee-ji walked up and invited them, camping on the mountain. Since it was his crush asking, he agreed in a heartbeat. During their chat, she recounted the kitchen fire incident. Both guys assumed she was mad at her mother because of it. Back at the house, Mrs. Lee already felt guilty for taking her anger out on her daughter. Her friend comforted her, explaining that the girl was not judging her. She merely felt sorry for both the sick old lady and her own mother. Out in the woods, Hee-ji clarified to the guys that she was not mad at her mom. Instead, her heart ached for everything her mother had endured. Not knowing how to express those heavy emotions, she had lashed out. Tae-oh then opened up about his own past. He used to be a rising baseball player, but a severe accident right before his big break ended his career forever. Unable to accept the reality, his mother was furious and refused to see him anymore. Back at the property, Mr. Yu hired someone to fix the gas pipes while rallying the villagers to help clean up the restaurant, ensuring it could open on schedule. Feeling his genuine care, Mrs. Lee's heart began to flutter. Later that afternoon, Hee-ji and Bohyun watched the sunset together. The breathtaking view finally lifted her spirits. He suggested she call her mother, assuming the older woman must be worried sick, but she was still reluctant. Curious, she asked about his own mother. He openly shared that she lived in Germany. He then told her to head back alone because he had somewhere else to be. Intrigued, she insisted on tagging along. Meanwhile, thanks to the collective effort, preparations for the grand opening were finalized. As everyone left, Sun-young realized the girl still had not returned and grew highly anxious, wondering if she had eaten or taken her medicine. Brushing it off verbally, Mrs. Lee said she was an adult who could take care of herself, though deep down, she was just as panicked. Spotting Mr. Yu sitting in a daze, they walked over to check on him. Deep in the woods, darkness fell as the two young companions took a break. Bohyun revealed that after his parents divorced, his mother moved to Germany, and they only met during summer or winter breaks. Whenever he missed her, he would come to this spot and tell himself she was an alien who could not stay because she had to protect her home planet. Despite making up these comforting excuses, he admitted he envied Hee-ji. She had a mother who patiently tried every possible way to stay close to her. He urged her to go home, hug Mrs. Lee, and truly cherish the mother who loved her with all her heart. Opening Opening up, she finally confessed that Mrs. Lee was not her biological mother, but her adoptive one. Her real mother and Mrs. Lee had been childhood best friends who grew up together, acting as the most important people in each other's lives. Her birth mother had her out of wedlock, but tragically died in a car accident. From that day on, Mrs. Lee stepped up, becoming a single mother to raise her. Lacking a blood tie, the two constantly worked hard to bridge the gap, forming a bond stronger than most traditional mother-daughter relationships. However, she sometimes felt deeply saddened that despite her best efforts, her mother still failed to understand her. As someone who also grew up missing a mother's presence, he deeply empathized with her pain. He noted that the moment of abandonment was not the worst part. It was the endless, agonizing wait day after day that truly broke a person, knowing deep down that the reunion would never happen, yet being completely unable to let go of the hope. After their heartfelt conversation, he gently pulled her up to her feet. The physical distance between them closed. Suddenly, he complimented her, calling her beautiful, but quickly covered it up by claiming he was talking about the night sky. The atmosphere wrapped around them was incredibly sweet. Heeji's heart was racing. Meanwhile, Mr. Yu gifted Mrs. Lee a bicycle and a box of drawing pens for the grand opening. He hoped that even while busy with her daughter and daily life, she would still find time to ride around the village and draw whatever she liked. He told her she could lean on him if the pressure became too much. Deeply moved, she never thought she would have someone to rely on. He affectionately patted her head, saying he was willing to do anything as long as she lived comfortably. Elsewhere, Teo hesitated for a long time before finally calling his mother. Unexpectedly, she harshly scolded him, claiming her life was ruined because she had bet everything on him. Hearing those words completely broke his heart. It turned out that after the accident ended his baseball career, he became an alcoholic, drowning his sorrows in beer all day. His mother tried to intervene, but he accidentally hurt her and constantly cursed at her. That was why she abandoned him. Back at the house, after Mr. Yu left, Mrs. Lee could not sit still and started cleaning the yard. When Heeji returned, she held her mother's hand and leaned into her embrace to stargaze together. Holding each other close, all their previous bitter arguments simply melted away. Heeji raised her phone to take a picture of her mother, but her vision suddenly blurred, and she collapsed to the ground unconscious. Panicking, Mrs. Lee desperately called out her name. Shortly after, Mrs. Lee rushed her daughter to the hospital. Gently stroking the girl's pale cheek, she deeply regretted not noticing the illness sooner. She recalled how, whenever her daughter complained of headaches or fatigue, she brushed it off as a minor issue, even joking that getting sick in senior year was a crime. She had prioritized the girl's studies over her health. Fortunately, Heeji woke up, needing only a few more tests. Seeing her daughter safe, Mrs. Lee urged her to do whatever she wanted from now on and to just follow her heart. Hearing the news, Sun Young called and wanted to visit the hospital, but Mrs. Lee told her to stay back and prepare for the restaurant grand opening. Remembering her heartfelt conversation with Mr. Yu the night before and his offer to be her pillar of support, she immediately gave him a call. He was busy cooking and missed it, so she hung up. Just as he was about to call back, his long-absent ex-wife suddenly showed up at his door. During their dinner together, she acted like a perfect wife and mother who had never done anything wrong. Demanding an explanation, he listened as she claimed she was back in Korea for a business trip, planned to stay for a few months, and wanted to live at the house to be closer to Bo-hyun. Furious at her constant selfishness and disregard for others' feelings, he stormed out to the yard to get some fresh air. Coincidentally, Mrs. Lee called him again, letting him know about the hospitalization. He worried deeply for her. While the daughter had her mother looking after her, Mrs. Lee was carrying the entire burden alone. He gently comforted her, telling her to call him instantly if anything happened. After hanging up, he typed a text asking if she needed him to come over, but feeling it was too ambiguous, he deleted it. Back inside, Bo-hyun was deeply emotional seeing his mother after 2 years. He hoped she would acknowledge his feelings, but she completely brushed him off, making an excuse to go get food. Realizing she still did not care about him, he walked away in disappointment. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee was taking her daughter for tests. Exhausted from staying up all night, she actually dozed off while walking and took a tumble. Both were embarrassed, but pretended nothing happened. Unfamiliar with the layout, she clumsily guided the girl around the hospital. Right then, the old woman from the village, who was there for a checkup, spotted them. As Heeji paused to catch her breath, the old lady rolled a wheelchair over. She seated the girl and expertly adjusted the IV drip rate, looking incredibly familiar with medical procedures. Back at the village, Mr. Yu checked on his son, worried he was upset about his mother. Bo-hyun stated he was not a child anymore and told his dad not to worry, assuring him he could handle it. At that moment, his father informed him about the hospitalization, leaving the young man deeply concerned. Word quickly spread around the village. The old lady and the locals felt terrified terrible for the sick girl. While they were chatting, Bohun's mother walked up to greet everyone and announced she would be staying for a while. Just then, Mr. Yu drove by. Spotting his ex-wife, he stepped on the gas to speed past her, thinking he was driving recklessly. The old woman sprayed a water hose at his car to block his path, forcing him to stop. Realizing she had sprayed the wrong person, she quickly apologized. Annoyed at running into his ex, he still told her to get in the car to avoid giving the villagers anything to gossip about. He drove her to his office and sternly reminded her that this was where he and his son lived. He warned her not to become the talk of the town and disrupt their lives. Back at the hospital, the old lady escorted the mother and daughter back to their room after the tests. Mrs. Lee asked why she was there, but the old woman received a phone call and walked away without answering. She headed straight to see Dr. Kim, stating she was gravely ill and only trusted him now. She also asked him to prepare some matters she needed to settle. After handling her personal affairs, she requested the doctor's help in taking special care of Heiji. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee was preparing porridge for her daughter. She mentioned she still disliked the old woman, but the girl admitted she actually felt very safe around her. Right then, Dr. Kim arrived and transferred the young patient to a special care room. Confused by the upgrade, Mrs. Lee asked him for an explanation. The doctor revealed that the old lady was actually a professor at this very hospital. Feeling guilty for previously setting their kitchen on fire, she wanted to make up for it by helping them in any way she could. Curious, Mrs. Lee asked about the professor's family. He explained that her husband had passed away the previous year and her only daughter lived in the US. Following her husband's death, her daughter urged her to move to America. Even though she was only 2 months away from retirement, she could not wait any longer to be with her child and boarded a flight. Tragically, right before takeoff, she received news that her daughter had died in a car accident. The massive shock triggered cognitive impairment, leaving her alternating between moments of lucidity and confusion. Hearing this heartbreaking truth, Mrs. Lee was both stunned and overwhelmed with guilt. Over at the farm, ever since hearing about the hospitalization, Bohun had been desperately trying to text the girl. However, a direct message felt too obvious, while a casual greeting failed to convey his deep worry. He constantly typed and deleted his drafts. At the same time, watching couples playing in the hospital courtyard made her think of him. She picked up her phone, wanting to ask if he was thinking of her, because otherwise, she would have no excuse to be missing him. Deciding the question was too forward, she tried to delete it but accidentally hit send on the first half of the text. Panicking, she quickly tried to cover it up, claiming she just wanted to get discharged early to go back to making money. He replied almost instantly, noting the farm was short-staffed, subtly hinting he wanted her back soon. Catching each other's drift, both smiled brightly. He even offered to attend a friend's birthday party with her once she was released. Meanwhile, the old professor suddenly suffered a dizzying headache as her condition flared up again. Back in the room, Mrs. Lee shared the tragic backstory with her daughter, leaving them both sighing in sympathy. Craving instant ramen, the girl convinced her mother to go buy some together. Returning to the lobby, they spotted the old woman wandering around in a panic. The moment she saw Mrs. Lee, she rushed over and grabbed her hand, mistaking her for her late daughter. Playing along, Mrs. Lee and her daughter gently escorted the confused lady back to her room. Once she regained clarity, she apologized for causing trouble. The young girl warmly invited her to share their ramen. Instantly snapping back to her usual bossy self, she ordered Mrs. Lee to fetch pickles and sausages, though she generously handed over cash for the errand. Later that night, after everyone fell fast asleep, Mrs. Lee quietly cleaned up, tucked the blankets around the two of them, and finally went to bed. Waking up the next morning, Mrs. Lee found the professor already sitting outside, waiting for the doctor to check on the young patient. Meanwhile, while out buying supplies for the grand opening, Sun Young ran into Teo, who helped carry her heavy bags home. Seeing such a large restaurant being managed by just one person, he decided to lend a hand. After unloading the goods, she taught him how to memorize the menu prices. He learned so fast that she immediately hired him as an official employee. Back at the hospital, the test results were finally in. The three of them anxiously headed to the doctor's office. The old lady held both their hands as they walked in to hear the verdict. The brain tumor had not grown any larger, and the hospital had already scheduled her for surgery. She comforted the relieved mother and daughter, assuring them Dr. Kim was incredibly skilled and urging them to trust his words and wait patiently. Delighted by her praise, the doctor politely escorted her out, patiently listening as she playfully gave him medical advice. Watching the heartwarming scene, the mother and daughter smiled, realizing how wonderful it felt to have such a solid pillar of support. Returning to their room, they packed their bags to get discharged. Just as Mrs. Lee was about to handle the paperwork, the professor walked in holding the discharge papers, announcing that everything was done, and she she had covered the remaining medical bills. She admitted to making past mistakes and could not promise it would not happen again, but offered this as an upfront apology. The young girl bowed deeply to thank her. Mrs. Lee was also incredibly grateful, but feeling shy, she made an excuse to look away. Driving the old lady's car, Mrs. Lee took them back to the village. Glancing in the rearview mirror at the two sleeping peacefully shoulder to shoulder, she felt a profound sense of happiness. For a fleeting moment, she finally knew what it felt like to have a mother. Parting ways, she thanked the professor once more, savoring the unfamiliar yet comforting feeling of having someone watching her back. Arriving home, she was amazed to find the restaurant spotlessly clean. Sunyoung revealed she had hired a new worker. Right on cue, Tae-oh walked in carrying a pile of grand opening gifts. Shortly after, the young girl got ready for her friend's birthday party. Though worried since her daughter had just recovered, Mrs. Lee remembered her promise and let her go without a fuss. Arriving at the venue, the girl looked everywhere for Bo Hyun, but he had not shown up yet. Meanwhile, to show their gratitude, the two older women went to the professor's mansion to invite her to eat at their restaurant. She tried to decline, but they linked arms with her and playfully dragged her along. Reaching their gate, Mrs. Lee bumped into Mr. Yu, who had come to check on the young patient. She informed him that her daughter had already headed out to a party. He warmly asked how she held up at the hospital. Sitting in his car, his ex-wife sensed an unusual chemistry between them. Noticing the woman, Mrs. Lee asked who she was. He brushed it off, saying it was a long story he would tell her another time. After he left, Sun Young revealed the woman in the car was actually Bo Hyun's mother, which explained their striking resemblance. Mrs. Lee's mood visibly dropped. Suddenly, the old lady bluntly stated she did not have a good impression of that woman. This instantly brightened Mrs. Lee's spirits, and she enthusiastically piled more food into the old lady's bowl. Teasing her, the professor called her naive and simple-minded. They laughed and joked, interacting naturally, just like a real mother and daughter. At the same time, hearing her crush was at the beach, the young girl excitedly ran to find him. Instead, she stumbled upon another girl confessing her feelings to him. After being rejected, the girl suspected it was because he liked Hee-ji. He explained that since she was battling a severe illness, he only wanted to take good care of her right now. Devastated by this, the eavesdropping girl assumed his kindness was born entirely out of pity and immediately ran away. Back at the restaurant, the professor helped clear the tables after the meal. Trying to stop her, Mrs. Lee accidentally bumped her arm. Checking on her, she suddenly remembered the burn was from the kitchen fire and felt a wave of guilt for yelling at her back then. She carefully grabbed some ointment and tenderly treated the wound. Meanwhile, the heartbroken girl sat outside in a daze, watching the rain. She remembered Bo Hyun's past advice that if she was afraid of the water, she should just get completely soaked so she would not be scared anymore and could step forward bravely. Stepping out into the pouring downpour, she called her mother, asking if she should give up or face what she truly wanted to do. Empowered by her mother's encouraging words, she cast aside all her doubts and dashed off to find him. Stopping to catch her breath due to her frail health, she saw him hurrying over. He opened his raincoat to shield her, and they ran back to the greenhouse together. He gently grabbed a towel to wipe the raindrops from her face. As the physical distance between them closed, the atmosphere grew incredibly intimate. Gathering all her courage, she confessed her inner turmoil. She admitted she did not know if his care was born of pity or genuine affection, but regardless, it made her incredibly happy. She felt truly comfortable around him and confessed that she might have fallen for him. He stood there, completely stunned, terrified of rejection. After putting her heart on the line, she panicked and tried to run away, but he grabbed her hand, pulling her back to reveal his own feelings. He confessed that lately, she had become his top priority, and he honestly did not know when he had fallen in love with her. With their feelings out in the open, the two officially started dating. Overjoyed, she could not stop replaying that sweet moment in her head, even while working. Seeing her daughter floating on cloud nine, Mrs. Lee asked what happened, but the girl kept her secret and happily went inside. As the restaurant grand opening approached, neighboring villagers gathered to show their support. Soon after, Bo Hyun's friends arrived, bringing rice wine as a congratulatory gift. After Tae-oh hung up the open sign, everyone eagerly waited for the auspicious hour. Once the doors officially opened, a massive crowd poured in to show support. Despite being incredibly busy, Mrs. Lee eagerly kept an eye out for a specific person. Right on cue, Mr. Yu walked in. Knowing he was busy with a business trip yet still made time to come, her face lit up with joy. Spotting the handsome architect, Sun Young happily went over to chat. Mrs. Lee invited them to sit, promising to serve the food herself. As he turned to leave, she pulled him back, took off her apron, and tied it around him, demanding he help serve tables. She joked that it was his punishment for arriving late. Later, as the young girl tried to serve a dish, a jealous local girl named Soo-jin cut in and snatched the plate. Seeing Soo-jin Soo-jin's nasty attitude, Mrs. Lee assumed her daughter had caused trouble again, but the girl playfully brushed it off, claiming people were just jealous of her beauty. By nightfall, Bo-hun brought his mother to join the festivities. Seeing her ex-husband wearing an apron, she immediately reached out to take it off. As both he and Mrs. Lee stood there awkwardly, the villagers called the ex-wife over to eat. As the regular customers gradually left, Mrs. Lee and the crew stayed behind to treat the helpful locals to a feast. To liven up the mood, the crowd cheered, demanding Mrs. Lee sing a song. She tried to decline, but the architect spilled the beans that she was an amazing singer and dancer back in school. The crowd's cheering grew even louder. Giving in, she finally belted out a few lines. However, barely 2 verses in, her voice cracked, sounding more like an out-of-breath rooster. Suddenly, Bo-hun's mother stood up and tapped a liquor bottle to interrupt the performance. She announced that since it was a grand opening, everyone should give a toast instead. Though the topic change was incredibly forced, the crowd cheerfully played along, laughing and chatting to ease the awkward tension. Feeling uncomfortable, Mr. Yu retreated to the kitchen to take a breather. Mrs. Lee follows him inside, worried she might be upset. Mr. Yu explains that Bo-hun's mother has a stomach condition and loves to show off wherever she goes. He begs her not to take it personally. Mrs. Lee brushes it off, saying she's just grateful people showed up to support them. Right after she says that, the drunk ex stumbles over and orders Mr. Yu to fetch her bag. The moment he steps away, she aggressively marks her territory. She tells Mrs. Lee how much she hates seeing him act close with other women and admits she is incredibly jealous of her. Hearing Mrs. Lee call him by a familiar name makes her blood boil even more. Mrs. Lee is completely trapped and does not know what to do. Luckily, Sun Young steps in. Having sensed the woman's hostility early on, she sarcastically asks if she plans to sneak in a second congratulatory speech. Mr. Yu walks back in just in time. His ex fakes losing her balance, falls into his arms, and uses it as an excuse to make him take her home. Not long after, Bo-hyun and Hee-ji are washing dishes together. When soap accidentally gets on Hee-ji's face, he tenderly wipes it off, leaving her blushing hard. A moment later, his friends walk in and ruin the moment. Soo-jin angrily questions why he is making a guest do chores. The guys assume she is just drunk and drag her out. The second they leave, the villagers and Mrs. Lee peek their heads in to spy. The couple quickly jumps apart, awkwardly claiming they were strictly washing dishes and nothing else. Later that night, the remaining crew cleans up. Tae-oh mentions how much everyone loved Sun Young's cooking, and Hee-ji agrees she could taste the passion in every bite. Sun Young steps outside for some air. Mrs. Lee walks up and thanks her best friend, admitting none of these good things would be possible without her. They promise to always stick together and never back down from any challenge. To get around easier, Mrs. Lee decides to learn how to ride a bike. Mr. Yu becomes her dedicated coach, patiently holding onto the bike so she will not fall. Getting a little too confident, she tries to show off and immediately crashes. He carefully applies medicine to her scrapes and promises to ride with her next time so she never gets hurt again. She feels embarrassed but deeply touched, finally experiencing the sweetness of being cared for. A few days later, the old lady brings a beautiful painting to celebrate the restaurant opening. She pulls Hee-ji close, warmly asking about her health. Watching her dote on her daughter, Mrs. Lee feels a deep sense of comfort. Over at Mr. Yu's house, he cooks breakfast for Bo-hyun. His ex complains that his prep is too complicated and wastes time, but he ignores her, knowing his son needs a solid rice meal every morning. She then asks him to tour a construction site as her consultant. He coldly refuses, telling her to just follow the checklist she already has. While walking the old lady home, Hee-ji is asked a huge favor. The woman needs someone to sign for her late daughter's belongings, and since her house is too far, she asks Hee-ji to accept the package. Hee-ji agrees to change the delivery address to the restaurant. She notices how depressed the old lady looks and wants to hold her hand to comfort her, but she just cannot find the courage. Out of nowhere, Bo-hun's mother shows up at the restaurant looking for Mrs. Lee. After eating a bowl of noodles, she admits it tastes exactly like her own mother's cooking. Mrs. Lee agrees, but casually adds that not all mothers are good cooks, making the woman awkwardly laugh. She then brings up the construction site. Since Mr. Yu rejected her, she asks Mrs. Lee to come consult instead. Initially, Mrs. Lee wants absolutely nothing to do with her. However, Sun Young and Hee-ji tease her, telling her not to run away from a rival. Giving in, she accepts the job. At the site, Mrs. Lee uses her years of experience to offer solid advice, but the other woman rejects every single idea just to be petty. Hearing that Mrs. Lee was dragged into this, Mr. Yu rushes over and catches his ex deliberately giving her a hard time. Back at the farm, Hee-ji excitedly drags Bo-hyun over to see the tiny sprouts growing in the garden. As a seasoned farmer, he thinks it is totally normal, but she is thrilled their hard work is paying off. Seeing her so happy, he playfully pinches her cheek. Just as things get a little shy between between them. A courier drops off the old lady's package. They deliver the belongings together. On the way back, Bohyun leads her to a quiet stream. He suddenly leans in close, thinking he's going for a kiss. Hee-ji closes her eyes and puckers up. Instead, he laughs, tells her to open her eyes, and holds out a glowing firefly. She looks around and realizes the whole stream is lit up with them. The view is absolutely breathtaking. He explains that these fireflies only come out after all the other bugs are gone. They arrive late, but they shine the brightest. He tells her that being late in life is not a bad thing, as long as you find the right answer and get your moment to shine. Hee-ji understands his deeper meaning, but it reminds her of a heavy truth she has been hiding. She confesses that her brain tumor requires continuous treatment and surgery, and her condition is much worse than he thinks. He instantly cuts her off. He tells her his feelings will never change because of an illness. He loves her for who she is, period. Moved to tears, she tells him he can leave whenever it becomes too heavy of a burden. Bohyun simply grabs her hand, pulls her in, and kisses her, letting his actions do the talking. Mr. Yu eventually drives the two women back from the site. He notices Mrs. Lee sitting in total silence and knows she is upset. When she gets home, Sun Young immediately sees she is down. Meanwhile, the old lady sits at home, staring blankly at her daughter's box of belongings. Back at the restaurant, Mrs. Lee vents to Sun Young about the humiliating site visit. Sun Young tells her to remember her worth. She brings up how they first became friends. Back then, Mrs. Lee used to aggressively push for faster work, and Sun Young snapped at her to grab a tool and help. Surprisingly, Mrs. Lee actually stayed and worked alongside her. They exhausted themselves on that project, but found a rare mutual respect, becoming best friends who always uplift each other. Sun Young warns Mrs. Lee not to lose her confidence over this drama, or she will be genuinely angry. She tells her to fight back when she is wronged. Feeling a weight lift off her shoulders, Mrs. Lee happily goes back to crunching the restaurant's revenue numbers. Mr. Yu finally scolds his former wife, telling her she had no right to mistreat Mrs. Lee when she was only trying to help. Forced to back down, the woman asks if she should go apologize. He tells her to figure it out herself, explicitly warning her to stop calling him pet names since they are no longer married or dating. The next day, Mr. Yu heads to Seoul for business. Bohyun tags along for a training course. The ex tries to chat, but Mr. Yu completely ignores her and walks away. Not long after, Hee-ji tells her mom about the old lady's package. At that exact moment, the old lady opens the box and looks at her daughter's photos one last time. Reading through the diary, she discovers medical records proving her daughter suffered from severe depression. A crushing wave of regret hits her. When Mrs. Lee drops by to check on her, she finds the belongings scattered everywhere and pills spilled all over the floor. Terrified the woman might do something drastic, she rallies everyone to search the area. They finally spot her, sitting dangerously close to the edge of a coastal rock. Mrs. Lee screams for her to come back. In her confused state, the old lady mistakes Mrs. Lee for her daughter. Crying hysterically, she begs for forgiveness, blaming herself for being a doctor and a mother who never even noticed her own child's pain. Playing the role of the daughter, Mrs. Lee gently tells her that if she truly feels sorry, she should stay by her side from now on. Convinced by the tearful plea, the old lady tries to walk back to the shore, but she slips and falls straight into the ocean. Mrs. Lee watches in absolute horror, traumatized by the memory of her own mother passing away. Luckily, Teo dives in and saves her. Even after the woman is safe, Mrs. Lee shakes uncontrollably, gripping Sun Young's hand as her friend pulls her into a tight, comforting hug. Returning from Seoul, Mr. Yu hears about the terrifying accident. It instantly brings back a memory of Mrs. Lee's father passing away. Back then, she cried alone in a corner, and he was too young and foolish to step up and comfort her. Terrified she is hiding and crying alone again, he ignores his ex's protests and sprints off to find her. Just as he suspected, he finds her quietly crying by herself, mirroring the past perfectly. But this time, Mr. Yu does not miss his chance. He rushes over and pulls her into a tight embrace, letting her cry her heart out in his arms. Waking up the next morning, Mr. Yu is mortified that he actually hugged her. Mrs. Lee is equally embarrassed, floating around the kitchen in a daze. Seeing her mumble to herself, Sun Young assumes she is losing her mind. Mrs. Lee cooks a bowl of porridge for the old lady. She asks Hee-ji to deliver it, but her daughter is still mad about the ocean stunt and storms off to her room. Mrs. Lee brings it in herself, just as the old lady is trying to pack up and leave. She stops her, telling her to rest and go to the hospital with her later. Getting defensive, the old lady demands to go back to her own house. Mrs. Lee finally drops her guard. She admits she used to resent her and actively avoided her, but not anymore. She wants the old lady to stay with them so they can face everything together. She offers her the spare room and tells her she can help manage the restaurant's finances if she wants something to do. Leaving the porridge on the desk, Mrs. Lee steps out. Desperate for an excuse to see Mrs. Lee, Mr. Yu wakes up early and waits at the park where she practices riding her bike. To his dismay, his former wife suddenly shows up in jogging gear, shamelessly calling him honey. He completely tunes her out, keeping his eyes peeled for Mrs. Lee. Right on time, Mrs. Lee pedals past them, proudly showing off how far she can ride without falling. Mr. Yu laughs and teases her for showing off. They joke around, completely freezing the other woman out of the conversation. Mr. Yu then invites Mrs. Lee to an architecture conference in Seoul. Before she can even reply, his ex cuts in, announcing she just accepted a speaking role there. In reality, Mr. Yu had mentioned the event to her before, but she rejected it because it sounded boring. Now, fueled by pure jealousy, she changes her mind and sarcastically invites Mrs. Lee to tag along. Refusing to back down from the challenge, Mrs. Lee accepts the invitation right on the spot. Back at the restaurant, Mrs. Lee confesses to Sun Young that she is actually furious about the whole exchange. Sun Young tells her the woman's words mean nothing. Seeing her friend genuinely worked up, she hypes her up, telling her to go to Seoul and prove her skills are just as good as anyone else's. She then casually asks her to pick up some donuts while she is there. Meanwhile, Bo Hyun calls Hee-ji out to look at some trees to clear her head. Unimpressed, she tells him she has already seen them. He explains that plants can actually hear encouragement, and if she cheers them on, they will grow faster. They work together to expand the garden. The old lady steps outside, but Hee-ji actively ignores her, still angry about the reckless cliff incident. Sensing the tension, Bo Hyun smoothly uses the hot weather as an excuse to pull Hee-ji away. Inside the kitchen, Sun Young is cooking when she notices Tae-oh looks pale and is dripping in sweat. She realizes he is running a dangerously high fever because he did not rest after jumping into the ocean. Even though he insists he can still work, Sun Young shuts it down. She forces him into the guest room, tucks him in, and orders him not to lift a finger until he is completely healed. As evening falls, Bo Hyun and Hee-ji head to the beach to watch the sunset. She is surprised he has not asked a single question about the old lady. He simply replies that it does not matter, because no matter what happens, he will always stay right by her side. Hearing those words, Hee-ji smiles, leaning her head on his shoulder. They sit in comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the shore. The very next day, Mr. Yu and his former wife pull up to the restaurant, ready to pick up Mrs. Lee for their tense trip to Seoul. Seeing Bo Hyun's mother looking elegant and wearing a silk scarf, Sun Young and Hee-ji immediately criticized Mrs. Lee for dressing too casually. Though Mrs. Lee claimed she didn't need to rely on her looks to attract people, she sprinted straight to her room to change into a dress, and even copied Bo Hyun's mother by wearing a silk scarf. That afternoon, Bo Hyun's friends were pulling weeds together. Previously, Soo-jin had confessed her feelings to Bo Hyun but was rejected. Still unwilling to give up, she declared she wanted to compete fairly with Hee-ji. Unexpectedly, Hee-ji revealed that the two of them had already kissed. Hearing this, Soo-jin was furious. Not wanting a fight to break out, their friends quickly dragged her away. Bo Hyun had actually wanted to make their relationship public, but he didn't expect it to be revealed this way. Deep down, however, he found it incredibly sweet. Arriving at the convention hall, Mr. Yu went to greet his friends. Meanwhile, Bo Hyun's mother went out of her way to mark her territory in front of Mrs. Lee. She declared that Mr. Yu was her first love, and that although they had missed out on each other before, she was determined to win him back now. Not only that, but she also publicly announced to everyone that her stay this time wasn't just for work, but because she wanted to reconcile with Mr. Yu. Immediately, Mr. Yu brushed her hand away and walked into the hall with Mrs. Lee. During Bo Hyun's mother's speech on stage, Mrs. Lee suddenly realized that many of the points she presented were actually ideas Mrs. Lee herself had suggested at the construction site. Listening to a speech entirely plagiarized from her own ideas made Mrs. Lee feel thoroughly bored, so she stepped outside for some fresh air. Unexpectedly, she overheard some people gossiping about Mr. Yu. Years ago, he had to take care of their child, while simultaneously shouldering the expenses for Bo Hyun's mother to study abroad. Yet, she ended up having an affair while overseas, and now had the nerve to return and demand a reconciliation. After the convention ended, Bo Hyun's mother asked Mr. Yu out for a meal, but he was still angry about her publicly claiming him earlier and flatly refused. He scolded her for always acting solely from her own selfish perspective. He firmly stated that there was absolutely no way they could ever get back together. He also warned her to watch her words and stop dragging things out. After that, Mr. Yu hurried off to find Mrs. Lee. He found her intently admiring the architecture of the hall and then running over to the fountain to take a panoramic photo of the building. Just then, Mrs. Lee slipped and almost fell. Mr. Yu instantly lunged forward to catch her. Losing their balance, both tumbled into the water, getting completely soaked. Looking at each other in their disheveled state, they suddenly felt playful and started splashing water at one another. Once back on shore, Mrs. Lee shared that she had been part of the construction team for this very building. While girls her age were still sitting in classrooms, she was already working to make a living. During that time, she missed her father terribly. She often imagined how different her life would be if he were still alive, but she felt lucky to have Hee-ji fill that void in her life. Mrs. Lee also praised Mr. Yu, noting that despite the unfairness he endured, he calmly accepted everything for Bo-hyun's sake. Mr. Yu understood exactly what she meant. When she had left the hall, he had followed her and saw with his own eyes that she had overheard the gossip about his ex-wife's affair. He also heard her sarcastic remark that anyone who remained blindly devoted after that was either a fool or an idiot. In that moment, her indirect comfort had deeply warmed his heart. That night, both tossed and turned, unable to sleep as they thought of each other. The next day, Hee-ji continued to ignore the old professor. Meanwhile, Sun-young came out and noticed her friend floating around on cloud 9. She advised Mrs. Lee to go outside. At the same time, the village head brought bread to the restaurant. Not for everyone, but specifically for the professor. The village head offered her a piece to try, and she found it quite tasty. The village head confided that she had heard about the professor's situation and shared that their fates were similar. Her own son had passed away at the age of 30, 10 years ago, so she deeply understood the professor's pain. She advised the professor to stay clear-headed and find a reason to keep living. For the village head, that reason was thinking about her son. The longer she lived, the longer she could remember him. Hearing this, the professor felt her mind clear up and a sense of relief wash over her. Meanwhile, a fully recovered Teo ran over and gave Sun-young a big hug, thanking her for taking care of him. He promised to work incredibly hard. Before starting his shift, he thanked his lucky stars for meeting her. Sun-young was deeply moved by his words. In the meantime, Mrs. Lee and Hee-ji headed to the city for a fun-filled day of eating and playing to their heart's content. Knowing her mother loved to draw, Hee-ji specifically took her to an art gallery. Watching Mrs. Lee passionately immersed in her hobby, Hee-ji felt immensely satisfied. As they strolled along the beach enjoying the view, Mrs. Lee asked why Hee-ji was giving the professor the cold shoulder. Back at the village, the professor thanked the village head for bringing the delicious food. Before leaving, the village head explained that Hee-ji was avoiding her because the professor reminded the girl of her own mother. Every time Hee-ji saw her, she wondered if her mother would suffer just as much as the professor if she were no longer in this world. Hearing this, the professor had a profound realization. By the beach, Hee-ji honestly confessed her fear. She was terrified that if she passed away one day, her mother would end up just like the professor, trapped in inescapable grief. Her greatest fear was that her illness would force the people she loved to put their lives on hold, because Mrs. Lee had lived her entire life solely for her. Hearing this, Mrs. Lee immediately marched back to the art gallery they had just visited and bought a full-year membership. She told Hee-ji that if that day truly came, she would live every single day to the fullest, making her life even more meaningful. Hee-ji burst into tears and hugged her mother tightly, as this was exactly what she had desperately needed to hear ever since learning about her illness. Meanwhile, the professor proactively sought out Sun-young, asking to be taught how to use the restaurant's payment system. Seeing her operate it flawlessly, everyone applauded her brilliance. At the construction site, Mr. Yu was chatting with his colleagues when one of them handed out candy. He instantly recognized it as Mrs. Lee's favorite type. Over at the farm, Hee-ji excitedly ran to find Bo-hun. She showed him the painting she and her mother had done and poured her heart out. She explained that her previous sadness stemmed from worrying her mother would become like the professor. Unable to bear the agony of losing a daughter, Bo-hyun immediately pulled her into a tight hug, his heart aching as he thought about how incredibly difficult it must have been for her to battle the illness all alone. Hee-ji reassured him that she was no longer afraid because she had him by her side. On her way home, Hee-ji happened to run into Mr. Yu, who was looking for her mother, and hitched a ride with him. During the drive, she finally confessed her real reason for coming to the village. After getting sick, she suddenly wanted to know exactly what kind of person her mother had spent her whole life missing. She mentioned hearing that back in high school, her mother had chased him all over campus. In Hee-ji's eyes, he wasn't her mother's first love, but her first unrequited love. Back at the house, the professor apologized to Mrs. Lee for the pain she had unintentionally caused her and Hee-ji. Mrs. Lee understood her feelings and even praised her as a reliable mother, noting that the moment her daughter sent an SOS signal, she had immediately gone looking for her. Mrs. Lee suggested that if the professor still found life too difficult, she could lean on her and Hee-ji for the time being. Just then, Mr. Yu and Hee-ji arrived at the front door. To give the girl and the professor some privacy, Mrs. Lee dragged Mr. Yu out for a walk. Inside, the professor promised to listen to Mrs. Lee. She wanted to try being a real mother who could be a strong pillar for her daughter. She begged Heji for forgiveness, admitting she had been weak and only wanted to escape. Heji gripped her hand tightly, using the gesture to offer strength and comfort. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee and Mr. Yu chatted happily as they walked. Finally reaching the beach, Mrs. Lee admitted that just talking to him for a bit made her feel much better. She wanted to live a lighter life, but lately, a constant stream of problems left her feeling helpless. Mr. Yu then pulled out her favorite candy. He declared that, as her first love, he granted her permission to cause trouble 3 times a week, as long as she felt comfortable and happy. Mrs. Lee immediately denied that he was her first love, but he bluntly confessed that she was definitely his. It turned out he had liked her ever since their school days. When she publicly confessed her feelings to him back then, he had pretended to be annoyed on the outside, but deep down, he had already accepted her and was overjoyed. After handing her the candy, he declared once more that she was his first love. This confession left Mrs. Lee incredibly flustered, even though she had heard others claim she was their first love many times before. The atmosphere between them grew awkward. Suddenly, fireworks lit up the sky. The two continued their walk, watching the display together. The next day, Mrs. Lee, wearing a beautiful dress and carefully done makeup, walked in radiantly to greet everyone. Seeing her, Sun Young suspected her friend had received a confession, but Mrs. Lee quickly denied it. Just then, Heji walked by. Seeing her mother's heavy makeup, she teased that she looked exactly like a panda, making Sun Young burst out laughing. As Mrs. Lee left, Teo slid in next to Sun Young, helping her savor the moment together. On her way, Mrs. Lee happened to notice a damaged wall in front of the village head's shop. She advised the village head to fix it to prevent any unnecessary accidents. However, the village head replied that good deeds depend on one's heart, and you reap what you sow. Since she was busy at the moment, Mrs. Lee promised to help out another time. Right after stepping outside, she ran into Mr. Yu again. Knowing she wanted to go to the park to paint, he offered to drive her to one filled with flowers, giving her plenty of inspiration. Meanwhile, Bohun's mother still hadn't given up hope on Mr. Yu. Remembering how he had flatly refused her dinner invitation the other day, she tried taking the initiative again, but the result was exactly the same. Despite this, she remained determined to persist until her ex-husband agreed. Over at the farm, Heji and Bohun were packing flowers. She snapped a photo of him with a bouquet and posted it online. She admitted she felt jealous of the flowers because they got to travel far. Growing up, she never got to go on a trip because her mother was always busy with work and she was always busy studying. Hearing this, Bohyun suggested they go on a trip together. Right at that moment, her best friend saw the photo online, realized she had a boyfriend, and texted that she was coming over to settle the score. Thrilled that her best friend was visiting, Heji excitedly ran home to put up more photos of them together, and even prepared matching outfits for them to wear. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee was busy gathering materials to fix the village head's wall. Seeing her struggling alone, the village head wanted to find some helpers. Just then, Bohyun's mother walked by, so they asked her to pitch in. However, she bragged that she had a dinner date with Mr. Yu that evening and was too busy getting ready. The village head cleverly plotted that if she didn't help, they would just call Mr. Yu over instead. Hearing that, and desperate to prevent Mrs. Lee and Mr. Yu from having any alone time, she reluctantly joined the work. While working, Mrs. Lee expressed her admiration for Bohun's mother getting to live abroad, but the other woman didn't find it joyful at all. Living there, she felt incredibly lonely despite constantly trying to adapt. Mrs. Lee countered that loneliness and sorrow were inevitable parts of life. What mattered was how you endured and overcame them. This profound statement completely changed Bohun's mother's perspective on Mrs. Lee. Back at the restaurant, a customer arrived. Hearing him complain about severe indigestion, Sun Young immediately went over to check on him. Stricken with jealousy, Tayo tried to stop her from getting close to another man. Sun Young quickly shoved him aside so she could talk to the elegant gentleman. After applying acupressure, she noticed his hand didn't hurt, so she guessed he was just stressed and decided to brew him a cup of buckwheat tea. Tayo was itching to punch the guy for touching his crush, but forced himself to hold back. During a break, the two women started chatting. Bohun's mother mentioned having a twin brother. Growing up, her parents heavily favored him. When it came time for college, they sent him to his dream school, while she was only allowed to attend a university that offered her a scholarship. Under those circumstances, she felt forced to fiercely cling to what was hers, sometimes even becoming selfish. Mrs. Lee expressed her silent admiration for that unwavering determination to pursue a goal. As for herself, being worn down by society had taught her to yield and lower her ego. However, Bohen's mother believed that it was exactly Mrs. Lee's current mindset that made her a truly strong, resilient person, not weak at all. She then took the opportunity to ask Mrs. Lee for a favor. As they tackled the final part of the job, Mrs. Mrs. Lee suggested to the village head that they plant flowers in the planter next to the wall. The village head reminisced that when her husband was alive, he used to plant a whole row of flowers there to admire. But after he passed away, her heartbreak made the wilting flowers and falling leaves unbearable, so she decisively ripped them all out. The story cast a somber mood over them. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, Bo-hyun's mother announced the job was done. Unfortunately, she slipped and fell off the ladder. Mrs. Lee frantically rushed her to the hospital. Even though it was just a minor sprain, Mrs. Lee felt incredibly guilty. Bo-hyun's mother rolled up her pant leg to show her a scar, the aftermath of an apartment fire 2 years ago. That accident had also caused severe psychological trauma, requiring 2 years of therapy, which was why she couldn't return to see Bo-hyun sooner. She confided that when a person is sick, their inner self becomes fragile. During that time, she craved family more than ever and profoundly regretted getting a divorce. Meanwhile, Hee-ji brought Bo-hyun along to pick up his friend. However, Soe was full of hostility toward him, suspecting he was scamming her naive friend. Seeing the tension, Hee-ji quickly dragged her friend away to ease the awkwardness. Later, Mr. Yu arrived to pick up the 2 women from the hospital. He scolded Mrs. Lee for being a busybody and foolishly taking it upon herself to fix someone else's wall. In reality, his harsh words stemmed from deep worry, but they only made Mrs. Lee feel more aggrieved, feeling like she was nothing but a third wheel. That night, Hee-ji called everyone together for dinner to introduce So-ok. Right then, a gloomy Mrs. Lee returned home. So-ok excitedly greeted her, but upon hugging her, felt something was off. Sun-young and the professor also noticed her pale complexion and urged her to rest. Meanwhile, So-ok exploded in anger upon learning that Bo-hyun and Hee-ji had already kissed. She accused him of seducing her innocent friend. Flustered, Hee-ji denied that it was her first kiss. Before Bo-hyun could even explain, his close friend Soo-jin, who secretly liked him, stepped up to defend him. Soo-jin argued that it was also Bo-hyun's first time being in love, and that he was always decent, with perfectly proper words and actions. Neither side backed down, fiercely defending the person they cared about. Finally, So-ok challenged her to a drinking contest to settle the score. On the other side, Mrs. Lee sadly recalled the favor Bo-hyun's mother had asked of her. Her return this time was to reconcile with Mr. Yu, hoping to reunite their family. She begged Mrs. Lee not to let Mr. Yu waver. Looking at the lollipops he had given her, Mrs. Lee felt completely torn. Meanwhile, unable to determine a winner through drinking, So-ok and Soo-jin switched to a running race. Initially, So-ok took a massive lead, but halfway through, she deliberately slowed down and conceded defeat. She stated her only wish was for Soo-jin to treat Hee-ji well. Though Hee-ji was blunt and outspoken, she was actually very gentle and soft-hearted. Since So-ok couldn't always be by her side, she asked Soo-jin and their local friends to take good care of her. Soo-jin reassured So-ok, saying she had long considered Hee-ji a true friend and promised to treat her with absolute sincerity. With that, she ran over and hugged Hee-ji tightly. Witnessing the heartwarming scene, So-ok finally smiled. That evening, Hee-ji chatted with So-ok. Her friend noticed that Mrs. Lee had changed significantly lately and curiously asked about Hee-ji's feelings for Bo-hyun. Hee-ji confessed that whenever she was with him, all her negative thoughts simply vanished, which was exactly why she wanted to be by his side. Hearing this, So-ok felt relieved, truly hoping her friend had found a good man. Suddenly, So-ok changed the subject to Jae-dong, Bo-hyun's friend, asking if he had a girlfriend yet. Surprised by her friend's quick interest, Hee-ji promised to play matchmaker for them. The next morning, So-ok said her goodbyes to everyone before heading back to Seoul. Bo-hyun's friend group also came to see her off. Right before she boarded the bus, Jae-dong subtly gave her the green light, signaling he was single, which made So-ok blush and hurry onto the bus. Jae-dong also expressed his hope that she would visit again soon. Watching her best friend leave, tears welled up in Hee-ji's eyes. Bo-hyun was about to step forward to comfort her, but Soo-jin pushed him aside and hugged Hee-ji herself. Meanwhile, Mr. Yu bought a set of paintbrushes as an apology to Mrs. Lee for his harsh attitude the day before. Opening up, Mrs. Lee confessed that whenever she was with him, she felt like that brave, carefree 17 or 18-year-old girl again. She deeply cherished him, but also hoped he wouldn't worry about her anymore. She urged him to return to Bo-hyun's mother and not leave her to be sad and alone. After Mrs. Lee walked away, Mr. Yu muttered to himself, explaining that he had only lost his temper yesterday because he was genuinely terrified she might have gotten hurt. Feeling utterly dejected, he went to his neighbor's house for some drinks. Even after firmly ending things with Mr. Yu, Mrs. Lee's heart remained heavy, but as she looked at the paintbrushes he had gifted her, an idea suddenly sparked in her mind. On the other side, the neighbor saw Mr. Yu's frustrated state and easily guessed he was lovesick. Speaking from experience, the neighbor advised him that love isn't just about destiny, it's about courage and making choices. Only by bravely pursuing doing it can one change the ending. Afterward, Mr. Yu went down to the beach, lost in thought. Painful memories from the past came rushing back. Years ago, he had flown overseas with a gift to surprise Bo-hyun's mother for her birthday. But as he opened the door, he heard her being intimate with another man in the bedroom. He had quietly backed away, never letting her know he had been there. Yet that agonizing pain had haunted him for years. Mrs. Lee asked Tae-oh to help carry her painting supplies to the village head's wall. She was determined to bring it to life. The next day, Bo-hyun's mother unexpectedly received an email from a university in Berlin. As long as Bo-hyun submitted a successful application, he could move to Germany with her. If Mr. Yu could take some time off to join them, the whole family could even squeeze in a vacation. Before Bo-hyun could even protest her overbearing plan, she excitedly ran off to find Mr. Yu to share the good news. On her way, while passing a villager's house, she happened to see Mrs. Lee transforming the old damaged wall into a vibrant mural of flowers. Just then, the village head arrived and was deeply moved by the painting. It instantly reminded her of her late husband, who had also deeply loved nature. She hugged Mrs. Lee tightly, thanking her for turning her husband's love into an eternal legacy. Witnessing this, Bo-hyun's mother was taken aback by Mrs. Lee's thoughtfulness and empathy. She realized that with her own competitive and aggressive nature, she could never compare to Mrs. Lee's pure, genuine kindness. Still, she tried to shake off the feeling and went to tell Mr. Yu about the Berlin opportunity for Bo-hyun. Upon hearing it, Mr. Yu finally brought up the painful past he had kept hidden for so long. Even now, he still blamed himself, feeling that his lack of attention had driven his wife to seek warmth in another man's arms. Believing he was just trying to be considerate, Bo-hyun's mother scolded him for being foolish. Just recently, Mrs. Lee had revealed that she overheard gossip about the affair during the convention. Knowing Mr. Yu would inevitably blame himself, Mrs. Lee had advised Bo-hyun's mother to confess and apologize sincerely, rather than letting him continue to suffer in silence. Bo-hyun's mother accused Mrs. Lee of crossing the line and meddling in their private affairs, but Mrs. Lee fired back, stating it wasn't meddling, she did it because she liked Mr. Yu. It was exactly because she didn't want the man she loved to be put in a difficult position that she chose to step back. Overwhelmed with shame, Bo-hyun's mother burst into tears and apologized. She admitted the divorce back then was entirely her fault and that she never should have let him carry that burden. She also confessed that from the very first moment she met Mrs. Lee, she knew she had already lost. Her recent actions were just a desperate, hopeless attempt to cling to the past. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee was silently enduring the heartbreak of letting go of the man she loved. The professor turned on the lights and jumped, screaming out loud upon seeing Mrs. Lee sitting there like a ghost in the dark. Sun Young and Hee-ji rushed out, thinking something was wrong, only to find Mrs. Lee looking completely lifeless. Realizing she was heartbroken, they all passionately encouraged her to be brave and speak her mind so she wouldn't live with regrets. Even Hee-ji cheered her on, pointing out that since she and Mr. Yu were each other's first loves, their destiny was meant to be. Spurred on by their encouragement, Mrs. Lee bolted out of the house and sprinted straight to Mr. Yu. Before he could even utter a word, she breathlessly confessed that she liked him, cherished him, and desperately wanted him by her side. Overjoyed, Mr. Yu instantly pulled her into a tight embrace, swearing he would never let her go again. In that magical moment, he realized that if he opened his heart to love one more time, this woman had the power to turn his entire world into a beautiful garden. The village head happened to witness Mrs. Lee's dramatic confession to Mr. Yu. The next day, she eagerly told everyone, but no one believed her, assuming she had just watched too many romantic dramas and was seeing things. The neighbor even chimed in, revealing that Mr. Yu had just come to him for relationship advice the day before, so there was no way he had already received a confession. Refusing to back down, the village head even reenacted how Mr. Yu had wrapped his arms around Mrs. Lee's waist to prove she wasn't making it up. As the gossip flowed, Hee-ji walked up and announced she was heading over to Bo-hyun's farm. As soon as she left, the village head sighed romantically, declaring that love was truly blooming all over their village. Right on cue, Mr. Yu walked Mrs. Lee home. The nosy villagers immediately gathered outside the window to spy on them, openly teasing the couple to their faces. Both Mr. Yu and Mrs. Lee were blushing furiously. Before leaving, Mr. Yu promised to pick her up later and cheered her on. Watching their sweet, affectionate exchange, the villagers felt a warm glow and couldn't stop playfully teasing them. Once the crowd dispersed, the professor finally noticed that Mrs. Lee's complexion had done a complete 180 overnight. Just yesterday, she looked pale and haggard, but today, she was absolutely glowing and radiant. The professor remarked that even from a medical standpoint, such a rapid transformation was incredibly rare. Sun Young brought up how the two had confessed their feelings and hugged tightly the night before. She even scolded Mrs. Lee for being too timid, teasing that she should have kissed him right then and there to officially claim her territory. Meanwhile, Bohyun and Heeji were busy planning their upcoming trip. Tae-oh kindly pointed out that without him tagging along as a chaperone, Mrs. Lee would never allow them to go alone. Hearing that, the couple quickly changed the subject. Neither of them wanted a third wheel ruining their romantic getaway. That night, hiding under their blankets, the two secretly called each other. Bohyun worried that their parents might not approve of their relationship, so they agreed to keep it strictly under wraps, especially from Mrs. Lee and Mr. Yu. Heeji then asked what Bohyun thought about their parents getting together. He casually replied that he had no objections and fully respected the adult's decision. Just then, his mother called out to him from outside his door. She informed him that she was moving to a hotel in the city and sincerely apologized for always being absent when he needed her most. She promised that from now on, she would be there for him every single second he needed her. Deeply moved, Bohyun promised that once he finally let go of the lingering resentment from her past absence, he would take the initiative to bridge the gap between them. To smoothly sneak away for their trip, Heeji lied, claiming she was going to Seoul to visit a friend and would be back by evening. Being her first time lying, she stuttered, her eyes darting nervously. Sun-young saw right through it instantly and deliberately teased her, forcing Heeji to feign annoyance and act frustrated by her aunt's probing questions. However, the three seasoned adults had already seen right through her little scheme. During the preparations, Tae-oh accidentally let slip that Heeji and Bohyun were going on a trip. Sun-young immediately shushed him, reminding him that everyone was pretending not to know. Tae-oh obediently complied and then affectionately called Sun-young sister, which made her incredibly happy. Noticing her hand was hurting, he pulled out some joint supplements he had bought for her, instructing her to take 2 pills a day for stronger bones. Beyond just health, Tae-oh had an ulterior motive. He hoped the supplements would keep her strong so they could enjoy better health together. Catching his drift, Sun-young immediately popped a pill. Early the next morning, before anyone else was awake, Heeji tiptoed out of her room, clutching her suitcase, but as she stepped into the living room, she froze. Mrs. Lee and Aunt Sun-young were already sitting there perfectly upright. Mrs. Lee gave Sun-young a knowing wink. Playing along, Sun-young walked over, shoved a wad of cash into Heeji's hands, and told her to buy some delicious food to share with So-ok and Seoul. Thrilled that her flawless acting had seemingly fooled them both, Heeji excitedly dragged her suitcase out to Bohyun, who was waiting at the door. Little did she know, the two older women were standing right by the window, quietly watching the whole scene unfold, silently shaking their heads at how terrible she was at lying. The following day, Sun-young took the professor to Seoul for a medical checkup. Initially, the professor planned to go in alone, but Sun-young insisted on waiting so she wouldn't feel lonely. Around the same time, Mrs. Lee, also worried about the professor, called Sun-young to make sure she was keeping a close eye on her. Later, while Mrs. Lee was happily singing to herself, Mr. Yu called and asked what she was up to. She lied, saying she was reading a book. To her surprise, he started singing the exact same song she had just been humming, completely catching her off guard. She rushed to the door and found him standing right there. Scrambling to get ready, she quickly did her makeup, put on a nice outfit, and ran out to meet him. He pulled out 2 pink cat-eared helmets and invited her for a scooter ride. As soon as they reached the edge of the village, they spotted the usual crowd of nosy neighbors gathered around. Not wanting to be the center of gossip, Mrs. Lee suggested taking a detour, but Mr. Yu wanted to show off their romance. He deliberately drove in circles right in front of the crowd, acting as if this was his grand destined love story. Eventually, Mrs. Lee embraced the fun, proudly soaking in the villagers' wide-eyed stares, feeling secretly triumphant. Arriving at the park, Mr. Yu pulled out a camera he had prepared, wanting to take some photos of Mrs. Lee. Back at her house, the walls were entirely covered with pictures of Heeji. He hoped that from now on, she would have her own beautiful everyday moments to look back on. They took solo shots, then posed together and sat down to review them. For the first time, Mrs. Lee realized just how brightly she could smile. She confessed that she only ever smiled like this when she was with him. Though she had missed out on many beautiful things in life, she felt incredibly lucky to now have someone who brought her such joy and happiness. Seizing the moment, Mr. Yu invited her over to his place for some noodles. He then casually suggested she stay the night instead of going home. With just that one sentence, Mrs. Lee immediately understood his underlying meaning, and she couldn't find a single reason to say no. So she hopped back on the scooter and headed to his house. This time, the gossiping neighbors at the village entrance seemed fully prepared to ambush them. From afar, they started loudly teasing the couple, asking if being affectionate at home wasn't enough, why they had to flaunt their love all over town. Instead of shying away, Mrs. Lee proudly boasted that her boyfriend was simply too handsome handsome, not to show off, and promised to flaunt him even more in the future. The neighbors were left speechless, utterly defeated by her shameless confidence. Meanwhile, having successfully escaped their parents' watchful eyes, Hee-ji and Bo-hyun felt like birds finally released into the open sky. They soaked in the beautiful scenery and took countless photos to capture the memories. Back in their room, Hee-ji picked up a guitar and played her mother's favorite song. Watching her, Bo-hyun was completely mesmerized. He playfully demanded that from now on, she was absolutely forbidden from playing or singing in front of any other man. Just then, Bo-hyun's stomach growled, so he took Hee-ji out to eat, only to find the restaurant closed. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, he offered to cook for her. Before long, a beautiful plate of spaghetti was ready. Hee-ji took a bite but didn't say a word, leaving Bo-hyun incredibly anxious about whether it tasted good or terrible. Right then, So-ok called for a private chat, so Hee-ji stepped outside to answer. Over the phone, So-ok gave strict instructions. If Bo-hyun tried anything funny, Hee-ji was fully authorized to use physical force. Meanwhile, Bo-hyun tasted the pasta himself and realized he had completely forgotten the salt. Forcing himself to eat the entire bland plate, he ended up with a terrible stomachache that lasted all night. Hee-ji gently took care of him, while Bo-hyun felt incredibly guilty. What was supposed to be a deeply romantic evening had turned into a complete disaster, but Hee-ji didn't complain. She simply tucked him into bed and told him to get some rest. Back at the village, Mr. Yu and Mrs. Lee were sipping on barley smoothies. Mrs. Lee cautiously brought up Bo-hyun and Hee-ji, trying to gauge if he would approve of the two kids dating. After all, Hee-ji was still sick, and realistically, no parent would want their child dating someone with a severe illness. Mr. Yu simply smiled and said he had no intention of interfering in his son's love life. Hearing this, Mrs. Lee was deeply moved. She confessed that it was exactly this unique, open-minded perspective of his that made her fall completely head over heels for him. Despite both nearing 50, they giggled and flirted like a couple of love-struck teenagers. Laughing, Mrs. Lee ran into the bedroom, only to stop dead in her tracks. Laid out on the bed were two sets of matching couples' pajamas. Seeing her reaction, Mr. Yu nervously offered to put them away if she didn't like them, but Mrs. Lee boldly gave him the green light, smoothly hinting that they didn't necessarily have to wear pajamas at all. Catching her drift, Mr. Yu stepped closer and pulled her into a passionate kiss. Meanwhile, exhausted from his stomachache, Bo-hyun slept straight through until the next morning. Waking up, he was filled with regret for ruining what was supposed to be their sweet romantic night. Hee-ji woke up soon after, relieved to see the color had returned to his face. Bo-hyun apologized profusely, feeling terrible that he had slept through their very first trip together. Instead of being upset, Hee-ji simply smiled and gave him a gentle kiss. Overwhelmed with affection, Bo-hyun pulled her into a tight, warm embrace. In that moment, just holding each other was enough to make them feel completely happy and fulfilled. On the other side, Mrs. Lee woke up feeling incredibly shy about the night before, completely unable to look Mr. Yu in the eye. Meanwhile, Hee-ji and Bo-hyun enjoyed breakfast together. She confided in him that seeing everyone else find their passion made her want to find hers too, but she still didn't know what her true calling was. Bo-hyun gently reassured her that she would figure it out eventually. It was only a matter of time. Hee-ji suddenly realized that her mother had started living life on her own terms, and now she knew exactly what she wanted too, to live well and happily by Bo-hyun's side. Right at that moment, the skies opened up and it started pouring rain. Ever the gentleman, Mr. Yu held an umbrella over Mrs. Lee. She felt so incredibly happy she could hardly believe this was real. Declaring that he was entirely devoted to her, he pulled her into a warm embrace. Meanwhile, the young couple decided to dance. In the rain, Bo-hyun suggested they make this first trip as romantic as possible, doing everything they could think of. That way, when he looked back on it later, the beautiful memories would completely drown out any sad ones. Hee-ji was overjoyed that they finally had promises to keep and a future to look forward to. Meanwhile, Sun-young went out with Tae-oh. The two enjoyed a nice meal and strolled around town. She gently urged him to go see his mother, but he immediately brushed it off, insisting they simply couldn't get along. Unwavering in her patience, Sun-young even cooked some food specifically for his mother and tried to reason with him. She told him he couldn't live completely alone forever and needed to let his mother know just how much he actually missed her. Convinced by her gentle persuasion, Tae-oh finally agreed to go. However, the second he saw his mother, he lost his temper and started yelling. Trying to regain his composure, he choked back tears and explained that the alcohol was what had ruined both their lives. He swore he had changed and desperately begged for her forgiveness, but his mother coldly refused to listen or even look at him, stating she only wanted to live the rest of her life in peace. Dismissed and heartbroken, Tae-oh quietly left. Outside, he told Sun-young he couldn't see his mother, then locked himself in his car and broke down in tears. Once he finally calmed down, he happened to look out and saw his mother sitting in a wheelchair. It hit him like a ton of bricks. She had been severely ill for a long time, and he had absolutely no idea. It turned out that years ago, during one of his violent drunken rages, she had suffered a severe heart attack, and her health had rapidly deteriorated ever since. She had pushed him away because she was terrified he would spend the rest of his life consumed by guilt if he knew. In reality, she missed her son terribly and only pretended to hate him. Learning the agonizing truth, Teo broke down sobbing, begging for her forgiveness. Though deeply painful, that raw moment of honesty was the exact release both of them desperately needed. Watching their tearful reunion, Sun Young felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Later, Teo texted her, deeply thanking her for her help. Sun Young arrived home right as Heji returned. Taking one look at her mother, Heji instantly noticed how bright and radiant her complexion was. Sun Young's sharp eyes caught it too, and she curiously asked if there was some good news. Not holding anything back, Mrs. Lee proudly announced that she was completely head over heels for Mr. Yu. She excitedly recounted all the incredibly happy moments they had shared over the past few days. That night, clutching her pillow, Heji crawled into bed with her mother, demanding to hear every detail of what she and Mr. Yu had been up to. Mrs. Lee happily shared how they had gone for scooter rides, drank barley smoothies, and talked for hours. She confessed that she truly felt she had finally met her destiny. Hearing this, tears silently rolled down Heji's cheeks, tears of both deep emotion and pure joy for her mother. She silently prayed her mother would continue living for herself and keep that beautiful smile forever. The following day, Mrs. Lee received a call from the hospital informing her that the surgery needed to be moved up. She felt a conflicted mix of relief that things were finally moving forward and deep, unsettling anxiety. Sensing her inner turmoil, the professor pulled her into a tight, comforting hug, just like a mother consoling her daughter. At the same time, Heji also received the news about the rescheduled surgery and immediately told Bo-hyun. Upon hearing it, he didn't say a word. He simply wrapped his arms tightly around her, letting his actions silently vow that he would stay by her side and never leave. With Heji's surgery rapidly approaching, Mrs. Lee was overwhelmed with worry. The professor comforted her, reminding her that right now, Heji desperately needed a strong pillar of support, which meant Mrs. Lee had to stay resilient. She promised to stand by Mrs. Lee's side and protect Heji together. The professor also went over several crucial medical details before they headed to the hospital. Due to the tumor's highly sensitive location, the surgery would be performed while Heji was Gorstein, fully awake, without general anesthesia. This meant she would likely endure more pain and exhaustion. In the worst-case scenario, there could be severe side effects like seizures or even fatal brain swelling. Despite the terrifying thought of her daughter in agony, Mrs. Lee forced herself to mask her fear, putting on a brave, cheerful face for tomorrow. Mrs. Lee then asked Sun Young to look after the restaurant while she took Heji for treatment. Sun Young assured her it was no problem at all. She reminded both mother and daughter to eat heartily so they would have the strength to fight. She also comforted Mrs. Lee, telling her not to worry too much because every storm eventually runs out of rain, promising she would always be right there for them. Meanwhile, Heji sought out Mr. Yu and asked him to hang out with her. He suggested grabbing a meal, but since it was still early, Heji spotted an old arcade and dragged him inside. They started playing games together. Noticing she was playing a very retro game, he teased her, wondering why she spent so much time mastering this while other kids were breaking their backs studying English. She explained that whenever her mother was stressed, she would bring her to this exact arcade to play this game, so it held all her childhood memories. The two ended up playing fiercely against each other. Heji won the first round, leaving Mr. Yu too stubborn to quit, demanding a rematch. A crowd of kids gathered around to watch them battle. After losing several rounds to him, a frustrated Heji shooed the kids away. By then, it was getting dark, so they headed out to eat. Spotting a seaside restaurant, Heji led him inside. When the food arrived, she took a bite and found it absolutely delicious. Watching her eat with such a hearty appetite brought Mr. Yu immense joy, and he promised to take her to his own favorite spot next time. Heji agreed, but playfully insisted he had to wait until her surgery was over. Then she finally poured her heart out. She confessed that since this was her mother's very first time dating, she might be a bit clumsy. Since she was 23, her mother had raised her all alone, completely giving up on romance and marriage just to be her mother. Now, seeing her mother and Mr. Yu so happy together brought her incredible peace of mind. Her only wish was that he would take excellent care of her. Mr. Yu looked her in the eye and honestly declared that he truly loved Mrs. Lee and would never let her be lonely again. That night, he went to Mrs. Lee, pulled her into his arms, and promised that whether she needed to cry or just sit in silence, he would always be there to catch her every emotion and be her strongest most unwavering support. Early the next morning, Sun Young and the professor took a walk along the beach. Both fervently hoped Heeji's surgery would be a complete success. The professor casually wondered when Teo would return to work. Sun Young wasn't sure, explaining she had advised him to take his time, enjoy being with his mother, and only come back when he felt truly ready. Impressed, the professor praised Sun Young for being so incredibly kind-hearted and thoughtful, which made Sun Young beam with pride. Meanwhile, Bohyun's friends gathered at the flower farm. Knowing Heeji's surgery was imminent, they desperately wanted to do something for her. Before meeting her, they made a strict pact: absolutely no crying in front of her. However, the moment Soojin saw her, she couldn't hold back her emotions and burst into tears. Just the thought of Heeji enduring the excruciating pain of an awake brain surgery was enough to make her sob uncontrollably. Bohyun was so terrified his face turned deathly pale. He went home and frantically scoured the internet for pre- and post-surgery care tips, desperately wanting to turn his overwhelming anxiety into practical actions to help Heeji through this ordeal. Sensing his deep unease and knowing he was scrambling for ways to help, Mr. Yu comforted his son. He gently told him that his sincere love and presence were powerful enough to help her overcome anything. Back at the restaurant, Teo finally returned to work, and everyone enthusiastically welcomed him back. He sincerely thanked Sun Young, acknowledging that it was entirely thanks to her that the bitter misunderstanding with his mother had been resolved. Thrilled, Sun Young immediately put him straight to work. On her way to find Bohyun, Heeji bumped into Soojin. Soojin handed her a high-end skincare set, strictly ordering her to maintain her beauty even while stuck in a hospital bed. The friend group had previously started saving up for a trip to Hawaii, and Soojin invited Heeji to join them once she was discharged, reminding her to contribute her monthly share. Heeji happily agreed. Deeply touched by the thoughtful gift, she shook Soojin's hand, officially accepting her as a true friend. Heeji went in for a hug, but a flustered Soojin quickly hurried away. Heeji then went to Bohyun's house, where he cooked pasta for her again. She took a bite, and the flavor was just as terrible as the first time, but she kept eating anyway, because her boyfriend had cooked it with so much love. This time, Heeji stopped hiding her true feelings. She confessed that she was absolutely terrified of the upcoming surgery and paralyzed by the fear that severe post-operative side effects might completely destroy her life. Bohyun gripped her hand tightly. He worried that his clumsy attempts at comfort might only add to her heavy burden. Since he couldn't fully grasp the depth of her thoughts, he chose to show his support through his actions. Aside from Mrs. Lee, he was the person who loved Heeji the most in the world. He promised that if she couldn't handle the sudden, terrifying changes after the surgery, she could always share every ounce of her fear and anxiety with him. His love for her would never waver, and he vowed to help her find her path in life. Again, deeply moved, Heeji melted into his embrace, temporarily setting aside all her worries to simply bask in the warmth of the moment. That evening, Mrs. Lee was frantically packing their bags for the hospital. Sun Young went into Heeji's room to boost her spirits. Understanding her aunt's unspoken support, Heeji threw her arms around her. The two had been like mother and daughter for years. They didn't need words to feel the profound depth of their love. Mrs. Lee walked in and wrapped her arms around both of them. The three women stood in silence, drawing strength from one another, silently vowing to get through this together. The following morning, before leaving, Mrs. Lee meticulously checked the restaurant's invoices and made sure everything was in order. A neighbor walked in and reassured her, telling her not to worry about a thing and to focus entirely on her health. The neighbor promised to handle everything at the restaurant alongside Sun Young. Overwhelmed with emotion, Mrs. Lee sincerely thanked the kind neighbor. Then, under the watchful, anxious eyes of Bohyun and the rest of the village, Heeji got into the car headed for the hospital. The nosy neighbors and the village head, who had lined the street hoping to crack a few jokes to lighten the mood, found themselves instantly crying before they could even speak. As the car drove past, all they could do was turn their backs to hide their tears and wave goodbye. Arriving at the hospital, the professor took Heeji for her pre-op tests, while Mrs. Lee and Mr. Yu handled the admission paperwork. Once the tests were done, Mrs. Lee pulled Mr. Yu aside, deeply thanking him for all his passionate help. She urged him to go home, but he insisted on staying just a little longer. By lunchtime, Heeji couldn't stomach any food, leaving Mrs. Lee fraught with worry. Heeji insisted she was fine, then suddenly remembered she had left her jacket in the testing room and asked her mother to go get it. Stepping outside, Mrs. Lee was surprised when Mr. Yu suddenly appeared, having already thoughtfully retrieved the jacket himself. When the professor woke up from a nap, Mrs. Lee brought Mr. Yu into the room. Noticing Mrs. Lee hadn't eaten anything either, the professor confidently left Heeji in Mr. Yu's care and forcibly dragged Mrs. Lee out for a meal. Knowing Mrs. Lee was a picky eater who hated fish, the professor deliberately ordered third one, patiently picking out every single bone for her, and strictly ordered her to eat properly and stop being so fussy. A profound, overwhelming warmth bloomed in Mrs. Lee's chest. In that moment, she felt exactly like a little child being tenderly cared for by her mother, a feeling that was both entirely foreign and incredibly wonderful. Meanwhile, back in the room, Mr. Yu and Heiji were fiercely competing in a video game. The professor and Mrs. Lee returned to find them bickering playfully, which brought bright smiles to their faces. After seeing Mr. Yu off, Mrs. Lee called her best friend to pour her heart out. She realized that true love is actually something you can see and feel. Mr. Yu's unwavering companionship and the professor's motherly care had enveloped her in warmth all day, making her deeply cherish every single happy moment. The next day, Heiji's test results were in. The doctor confirmed the surgery would proceed exactly as planned and was expected to take at least 6 hours. Before making the first incision, they would run a simulation to help her get accustomed to the process, firmly reminding her to place her absolute trust in the medical team. He also bluntly detailed the potential risks, including complications during or after the procedure, such as severe speech impairment or permanent cognitive deficits. A little while later, So-Okay arrived at the hospital to visit her best friend. After greeting the professor and Mrs. Lee, she confidently reassured Mrs. Lee to leave Heiji to them, promising they would provide all the mental and emotional support she needed. So-Okay had brought a massive stack of comic books to keep Heiji from getting bored. The professor walked in, loudly complaining that kids these days only liked useless comic books and insisted that reading actual literature was the only superior choice. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee and Mr. Yu went to visit the grave of Heiji's biological mother. Years ago, after Mrs. Lee was abandoned by her own mother, Heiji's mother was also suffering constant abuse from her father. The two unfortunate girls had leaned on each other for survival, dreaming of the day they could move to the big city and build successful lives together. But then, Heiji's mother unexpectedly got pregnant by a man who refused to take any responsibility if her abusive family found out. She was pregnant out of wedlock. The consequences would have been unimaginable. Desperate, Mrs. Lee fled to Seoul with her best friend, where Heiji was born. The two women made a solemn pact to raise the child together, so she would always be surrounded by boundless love. But tragedy struck, and a horrific car accident claimed the life of Heiji's mother. Ever since that day, Mrs. Lee had been tortured by guilt, constantly blaming herself for not taking better care of Heiji, agonizing over the times she hadn't even noticed when the girl was sick. Standing before the grave, she tearfully begged Heiji's mother to watch over their daughter, praying she would safely survive this terrifying ordeal and live a smooth, happy life. Back at the restaurant, things were running flawlessly. Customers poured in, and the neighbor and Teo handled everything with smooth efficiency. However, Sunyoung's mind was entirely consumed by the hospital. Plagued by anxiety, she was silently crying on the inside while desperately trying to maintain a calm facade. Seeing right through her brave front, the neighbor gently comforted her, telling her that if she needed to cry, she should just cry and let her heavy heart finally relax. Back in the hospital room, the professor, who had just been loudly condemning comic books as utterly useless, was now completely engrossed, reading straight through to volume 5 without taking a breath. Just then, Bohyun arrived. The three young friends chatted and laughed while looking through Heiji's high school photos. Wanting to give the young couple some desperately needed privacy, So-Okay tactfully dragged the professor out for a walk. At this time, Bohyun offered to stay, walk Heiji to the operating room, and wait for her to come out. However, she refused. Her biggest fear was that her illness would force her loved ones to put their lives on hold, so she wanted him to continue living normally. Meanwhile, she promised to try her best to adapt to her post-surgery life. Furthermore, during their previous trip when he got sick, she felt incredibly sad. She knew he was trying to act normal, but was actually terrified and in pain. Inside, respecting her decision, Bohyun pulled her into a hug. The warmth of his embrace gradually melted away her fears. That night, before the surgery, the doctor explained the terms and asked Heiji to sign the consent form. Although usually brave, looking at the details on the paperwork made her undeniably anxious. Both she and Mrs. Lee tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep from the worry. The next morning, Heiji told her mother not to agonize or panic during the procedure. She hoped that once she recovered, they could go on a trip together. Soon after, Mr. Yu and So-Okay arrived at the hospital. Without saying a word, Mr. Yu simply hugged Mrs. Lee to comfort her. Meanwhile, stepping into the room and seeing Heiji with a shaved head, So-Okay burst into loud sobs. Heiji hugged her friend, reassuring her that everything was fine. The old professor was also pacing anxiously. Back at home, Sunyoung had tried to suppress her worries for 2 days, but finally lost control and cried silently. As for Bohyun, he initially tried to drown his thoughts in work, but repeatedly had to stop, burying his face in his hands as he sobbed. Surrounded by the love of her family and friends, Hee-ji was wheeled into the operating room. Knowing her mother was even more terrified than she was, she encouraged her to stay strong. As the operating room doors slowly closed, Mrs. Lee's anxiety peaked, leaving her barely able to stand. Right at that moment, Bo-hyun sent her a video. It turned out that a few days prior, Hee-ji had asked him to record it so that, no matter the outcome, her mother could hear her true feelings. In the video, she confessed that when she first learned of her diagnosis, she blamed the heavens for being unfair. While others in their 30s and 40s enjoyed smooth sailing lives, she had to fight fate for every single day. Yet, in her short life, her greatest source of happiness was Mrs. Lee. The days they spent together were her most joyful moments. Now, just thinking of her mother stripped away all her fear of the surgery. Overwhelmed with emotion, Mrs. Lee burst into tears, letting them flow freely as she silently prayed for her beloved daughter to survive safely and live a happy life. The surgery lasted for over 2 hours. Outside, everyone waited in agonizing suspense. Finally, the doors opened. The doctor stepped out, happily announcing that the operation was a success. The tumor was not in as dangerous a location as initially feared, allowing the procedure to go very smoothly. Deeply moved, Mrs. Lee thanked the surgeon. He informed her that Hee-ji would be moved to the intensive care unit for the night and would not be able to speak until the next day. Her language functions remained intact, and her ability to recognize images and speak in long sentences was completely unaffected. Hearing this, Mrs. Lee breathed a massive sigh of relief, the heavy burden of anxiety finally lifting from her heart. After the professor and So-ok left, Mr. Yu sat down next to Mrs. Lee, declaring he would stay by her side and go nowhere. Choking back tears, she recalled the days before the diagnosis, when her daughter complained of headaches. She just told her to take painkillers and even scolded her for whining too much, forcing her to endure it to focus on her studies. She harshly blamed herself for being a terrible mother. To comfort her, Mr. Yu showed her a picture of a bicycle he planned to buy for Hee-ji, thinking cycling would be great for her recovery. This only made Mrs. Lee feel more remorseful, calling herself foolish for constantly dwelling on the past instead of looking toward her daughter's future. Mr. Yu reassured her she was not foolish at all. She was simply being honest with a mother's emotions, as parents constantly worry about their children. Despite his words, her inner unease lingered. Receiving a checking-in text from Sun Young, she guessed her friend was probably crying. Unable to hold back, Mrs. Lee burst into tears as well. Just then, a nurse stepped out to announce that Hee-ji had been moved to a regular room. The moment the girl opened her eyes, she shed tears of joy greeting her mother, thrilled to see her again. Right before going under, she had been terrified she might never see her mother again. But now, she felt incredibly blessed that life had granted her a second chance. A few days later, Hee-ji was discharged. Seeing her return safely, Sun Young ran up and hugged her tightly, finally able to let out a sigh of relief. However, the surgery had temporarily affected the girl's speech. She was not ready to converse or meet with many people, causing her spirits to plummet. Hearing she was back, Bo-hyun ran over every single day wanting to see her, but she refused to let the man she loved see her in such a poor state. No matter how many times he visited, she turned him away. Eventually, he just sat quietly waiting outside, knowing full well he was right there. She texted him, calling him her guiding lighthouse when she was lost. He texted back, expressing how much he missed her and hoping the day they could see each other again would come very soon. To pull her out of her depression, the professor started helping her practice color recognition. The villagers took turns bringing precious herbal remedies, praying for her swift recovery. Her friends even gifted her a custom surfboard designed by Dong-suk, hoping she would quickly regain her strength and return to her normal life. Sun Young frequently took her for walks along the beach, telling jokes to chase away her gloom. All this gathered love formed a warm ocean surrounding her, slowly helping her open her heart again. Finally, she took the initiative to visit the flower farm to find Bo-hyun. With red, teary eyes, he pulled her into a fierce hug. The overwhelming joy of regaining what was almost lost became crystal clear in that very moment. In the blink of an eye, a year passed. Hee-ji's speech disorder completely healed, and she became as bright and confident as before. Mr. Yu often used delivering milk as an excuse to invite her to play video games. Mid-game, he complained about knee pain, whining that his joints had been aching lately for no reason. She handed him some of Sun Young's supplements, reminding him to take good care of his health because they still had plenty of games left to beat. Watching the two deeply engrossed in their game, Mrs. Lee used the excuse of bringing food to Bo-hyun to tattle on them. He agreed to move his computer to the living room to keep a closer eye on his dad. Mrs. Lee then invited the young man to go shopping, telling him not to tell his father because Mr. Yu was terribly indecisive. She simply wanted to personally take better care of Bo-hyun. Meanwhile, Hee-ji was waiting for her her boyfriend. The professor asked if she was heading somewhere. Heiji revealed she wanted to visit her old medical school. Hearing this, the old lady shared that back in the day, she only became a doctor because of her high grades, treating medicine purely as a job. It was not until retirement that she realized she had never truly connected with her patients. Only after becoming a patient herself did she truly understand the necessity of empathizing with their emotions. Witnessing Heiji's journey had further solidified this realization. Soon after, Heiji and Bohyun returned to the campus to submit her readmission application. She was determined to finish her studies and eventually become a brilliant doctor just like the professor. Meanwhile, Bohyun planned to study abroad in Germany to pursue his passion for landscape design. Though she did not want a long-distance relationship, she understood that pursuing their individual dreams was the right choice. They would definitely reunite in the future as the best versions of themselves. Returning home, she told her mother about her readmission. Worried about her health, Mrs. Lee did not want her to overwork herself. Heiji promised that she would always put her health first, deeply cherishing this second chance at life. Hearing this, her mother finally nodded in agreement, fully supporting her dream. That evening, the whole household gathered together. The professor suddenly announced her decision to move back to Seoul. She feared that if she stayed, she would eventually become a burden to everyone. Mrs. Lee quickly urged her to stay, insisting their bond was not just a casual relationship, they were family. They relied on and supported each other. Sun Young chimed in, noting that the bonds forged by choice are often far stronger than the bloodlines you are born with. Heiji hugged the professor tightly, absolutely refusing to let her leave. Sun Young also leaned affectionately into her embrace, playfully whining that if she left, she had to take her along. Surrounded by such profound warmth and love, the professor chose to stay and continue living with them. That same day, a neighbor helped the restaurant brainstorm an idea to host a networking event for local residents. Mrs. Lee and the crew busily prepared. Thanks to the delicious food and their enthusiastic hospitality, reservations for future parties kept pouring in. Meanwhile, Heiji and Sujin went to pick up it. So okay. The friend group then hung out, walking and joking around happily. Sujin teased the couple, assuming they must have had a blissfully romantic alone time, and grilled them on whether they had kissed yet. Heiji blushed furiously, while Bowen stood there awkwardly. Right then, Jae-dong walked up and was instantly hit with the same question about his last kiss, making his face turn beet red. So okay looked just as flustered. The whole group immediately connected the dots, realizing those two had just kissed, and began teasing them mercilessly. To thank their helpful neighbor, Mrs. Lee and Sun Young invited her and the crew to a karaoke night. Mid-song, Mr. Yu showed up and pulled Mrs. Lee outside for a private date. A bit tipsy, she purposefully leaned into his chest, thoroughly enjoying the feeling of being pampered and cared for while acting playful. By then, everyone was slightly buzzed and headed home together, while Tayo carefully looked after a tipsy Sun Young. During their chat, he unexpectedly confessed that he liked her. Stunned by the confession, she scrambled onto the bus. He chased after the vehicle, shouting his feelings out loud. Hearing his heartfelt words, she broke into a bright smile, silently accepting his love. The movie ends here. See you again in the next videos.